I'm Samantha, 29, the artistic underachiever in a family where my sister Natalie always shined brighter. When her promotion party invitation arrived, I hoped it might finally be our chance to heal old wounds. Instead, with champagne glasses raised and corporate executives watching, she transformed her moment of triumph into my public humiliation. Someone had to play the failure, she smirked, silencing the room. But then her boss stepped forward, microphone in hand, and what happened next changed everything between us. If you're watching this from your own family battlefield, hit like and subscribe, then let me know in the comments if you've ever been publicly humiliated by a sibling. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this ends. Growing up with Natalie was like existing in the shadow of a supernova. From our earliest memories, our differences were not just noticed, but meticulously cataloged and compared by our parents, Eleanor and Richard Thompson. While Natalie excelled academically without seeming effort, I struggled through standardized tests and structured learning environments. My brain simply worked differently. Where she produced perfect test scores and analytical papers, I created art that our teachers praised but my parents dismissed as just doodles. This pattern established itself early and only deepened with time. I vividly remember my 10th birthday when I proudly displayed a painting I'd worked on for weeks. My father glanced at it briefly before turning his attention to Natalie's perfect math test pinned to the refrigerator. "Now this," he said, tapping the red A+ circled at the top, "this is something that will take you places." My mother nodded in agreement, adding, "Samantha, honey, maybe if you focus like your sister, you wouldn't be struggling in algebra." These moments accumulated like tiny cuts, barely noticeable individually but collectively debilitating. By high school, our roles were firmly established. Natalie was class president, valedictorian, and headed to Princeton on a partial scholarship. I was the girl with creative promise who wasn't living up to her potential, according to every parent-teacher conference. At Natalie's high school graduation dinner, my father raised his glass in a toast to my daughter who never disappoints. The words weren't directed at me, but their meaning couldn't have been clearer. Even when I managed small victories, they were diminished by comparison. When I won a regional art competition in my senior year, my mother's response was, "That's nice, dear. Did you know Natalie just got an internship at Anderson Marketing?" These dynamics didn't improve with adulthood. If anything, the gap widened as Natalie's conventional success became more visible. Now at 29, I was scraping by as a freelance graphic designer. My apartment was a small one-bedroom in a neighborhood that my mother referred to as transitional, her polite word for not quite gentrified enough. The past month had been particularly challenging after losing Horizon Coffee, my biggest client, when they decided to take their design work in-house. I was behind on rent and surviving on ramen and the occasional free meal when my boyfriend Jason could afford to treat. Jason was my rock, a kindergarten teacher who understood what it meant to choose passion over paycheck. He believed in my art in a way my family never had, encouraging me to pursue the more experimental design work that actually fulfilled me rather than just chasing commercial clients. Meanwhile, Natalie had followed a perfectly plotted trajectory from Princeton to an MBA, then straight into the corporate marketing world. At 32, she was already a senior account executive at Brenner and Stone, one of the top marketing firms in the city. She drove a BMW, lived in a downtown condo with gleaming hardwood floors and floor-to-ceiling windows, and dated Ethan, a corporate attorney whose family had connections to everyone who mattered. Our most recent family gathering had been Thanksgiving 4 months ago, a tense affair that culminated in Natalie questioning my career choices over pumpkin pie. "Still doing those little website designs?" she'd asked, in that tone that managed to sound both concerned and condescending simultaneously. "You know, we have an entry-level position in our graphics department." I could put in a word. When I explained that I preferred the creative freedom of freelancing, my mother jumped in. "Freedom doesn't pay the bills, Samantha. Maybe it's time to consider something more stable like your sister did." My father nodded sagely, adding, "Natalie was making six figures by your age." I'd left early that night, with Jason squeezing my hand supportively as I fought back tears in the car. Despite these dynamics, I still tried to maintain some relationship with my sister. I dutifully sent birthday cards, congratulatory texts for her achievements, and occasionally suggested meeting for coffee, invitations that were usually met with "so busy right now, maybe next month." I told myself it was just her hectic schedule, not a deliberate avoidance of spending time with her less successful sister. I wanted to believe that somewhere underneath the competition and comparison, there might still be a foundation of sisterly love. And honestly, a small part of me still yearned for her approval, as if winning over my harshest critic might finally validate my choices. The invitation to Natalie's promotion party arrived on a Tuesday, an expensive cream-colored card with embossed gold lettering announcing her elevation to Vice President of Client Relations at Brenner and Stone. I stood in my cramped kitchen, reading and rereading the formal text while my ancient refrigerator hummed loudly in the background, a fitting soundtrack to the contrast between our lives. My first instinct was to decline. The thought of spending an evening watching Natalie bask in adoration while fielding pitying looks and uncomfortable questions about my own career made my stomach clench. When Jason came over that evening, I showed him the invitation. "Are you going to go?" he asked, settling beside me on my second-hand couch. I sighed, running my finger over the raised lettering. "I don't know. Part of me thinks I should, to be supportive. But these things always end up making me feel terrible about myself." Jason considered this, his kind eyes studying my face. "What if this could be different? Maybe seeing you support her success might help bridge that gap between you. Or maybe she just invited me because our parents would notice if she didn't," I countered. "Sam," Jason said gently, "you're always saying you wish things were better between you two. Maybe this is an opportunity." His optimism was one of the things I loved most about him, even when it felt naive. After a long discussion weighing the potential for reconnection against the almost certain discomfort, I decided to attend. If nothing else, it would show Natalie and my parents that I could be genuinely happy for her success, even if they couldn't return the sentiment for my different path. The decision made, a new problem emerged: what to wear. My wardrobe consisted primarily of comfortable clothes suitable for working from home, with a few meet the client outfits that were nowhere near formal enough for what would undoubtedly be an elegant corporate event. With less than 2 weeks until the party and barely enough in my checking account to cover next month's rent, I called my friend Cassandra in desperation. Cassandra worked at a local boutique and had an uncanny ability to find hidden gems at thrift shops. "We'll find you something that makes your sister's lawyer boyfriend drool and her coworkers wonder why you're not designing for Vogue," she declared confidently. The following Saturday, we embarked on a marathon shopping session through every consignment store and sample sale in a 20-mile radius. By the fifth store, exhaustion was setting in, and I was ready to give up. "Maybe I should just tell her I'm sick," I muttered as we rifled through another rack of discounted dresses. "And miss the chance to show up looking amazing?" "Not happening," Cassandra replied firmly. In the very back of the final store, hanging slightly apart from the other garments, we found it, a midnight blue dress with a subtle shimmer that caught the light as the fabric moved. It was slightly more formal than I'd normally choose, but not ostentatiously so, with clean lines that complemented my figure. Best of all, it had been drastically reduced because of a small flaw in the stitching that Cassandra assured me she could easily fix. As I tried it on, emerging from the dressing room to Cassandra's enthusiastic approval, a small spark of confidence ignited. Maybe I could do this. Maybe I could walk into Natalie's world for one night and hold my head high. "Just promise me one thing," Cassandra said as we waited in line to pay. "Don't let her get to you. No matter what she says or how she acts, remember that your worth isn't measured by her standards." I nodded, but we both knew that was easier said than done after a lifetime of exactly that kind of measurement. The day of the party arrived with a mix of spring rain and my own stormy emotions. I spent the morning trying to work on a small design project, but my concentration kept slipping as I mentally rehearsed potential conversations. What would I say when Natalie's colleagues inevitably asked what I did for a living? How would I respond if someone commented on the differences between us? Jason arrived early to provide moral support, looking handsome in the one good suit he owned, usually reserved for parent-teacher conferences and special occasions. "You look beautiful," he said sincerely as I emerged from the bedroom in my carefully selected outfit, hair and makeup done with more attention than I'd given them in months. "Are you ready for this?" I wasn't, not really, but I nodded anyway. As ready as I'll ever be. The drive to the venue took us from my neighborhood of modest apartments and family-owned businesses to the gleaming downtown district where success was measured in square footage and architectural prestige. Brenner and Stone had rented out the top floor of the atrium, one of the city's most exclusive event spaces, known for hosting celebrity weddings and high-profile corporate functions. As we pulled up to the valet stand, I took a deep breath. "Remember," Jason said, giving my hand a reassuring squeeze, "we can leave anytime you want." With that small comfort, I stepped out of the car and toured what I hoped might be a new chapter in my relationship with my sister. The atrium lived up to its reputation. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, casting prismatic light across polished marble floors. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the city's skyline, now glowing in the early evening light. Well-dressed servers circulated with trays of champagne and artfully arranged hors d'oeuvres that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. I accepted a glass of champagne, needing something to occupy my hands and calm my nerves. Jason whispered in my ear, "Remember, you belong here just as much as anyone else." I wasn't convinced, but I appreciated the sentiment. We spotted Natalie holding court near the center of the room, surrounded by admirers in expensive suits and designer dresses. She looked impeccable in a tailored red dress that emphasized her confident posture, her dark hair arranged in an elegant updo that had undoubtedly cost several $100s at a salon. Beside her stood Ethan, tall and conventionally handsome in a way that matched his conventional success. When Natalie finally noticed us approaching, her smile flickered almost imperceptibly before re-establishing itself. "Samantha, you made it," she said, leaning in for an air kiss that carefully avoided actual contact. "And Jason, nice to see you again." Her tone suggested it was anything but. "Congratulations on the promotion," I said genuinely. "You must be really proud." "Well, it was the natural next step," she replied with practiced modesty that somehow still managed to sound like boasting. "Let me introduce you to some people." What followed was a rapid-fire series of introductions to colleagues whose names blurred together, each one regarding me with the same polite curiosity one might show toward an exotic but potentially disappointing exhibit. "This is my sister, Samantha," Natalie would say, never mentioning my profession or accomplishments, as if I existed solely in relation to her. "Samantha does some graphic design work," she finally added when one colleague inquired directly, her tone suggesting a hobby rather than a career. Ethan eventually separated us from the group, perhaps sensing my discomfort or simply wanting to establish his own connection to Natalie's family. "So, Sam, still doing the art thing?" he asked, swirling his whiskey with one manicured hand. "Graphic design," I corrected gently. "Yes, I'm working with several clients on brand development and digital presence." "Sounds creative," he replied, in a tone that suggested creative was synonymous with financially questionable. "It must be nice having such flexibility in your schedule." Before I could respond to the thinly veiled implication that my work wasn't really work, we were interrupted by the arrival of an older man with salt and pepper hair and keen eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "Ethan, aren't you going to introduce me?" he asked, his voice carrying authority without aggression. "Of course, Harold. This is Samantha Thompson, Natalie's sister. And her boyfriend, Jason Carter." "Sam, Jason, this is Harold Brenner, the founding partner. One of the Brenners of Brenner and Stone, I realized, feeling suddenly out of my depth. But Harold surprised me with his warm handshake and genuine smile. Natalie mentioned you're a graphic designer, he said, and I was startled that she'd mentioned me at all, let alone my profession. Yes, I work independently with various clients on their visual branding and digital assets, I replied, falling into the elevator pitch I'd practiced. Independent work can be the most fulfilling, Harold remarked. I started this company because I couldn't stand having anyone else dictate my creative vision. Do you have a website? The conversation shifted into surprisingly comfortable territory as Harold asked intelligent questions about my design philosophy and approach. For the first time that evening, I felt seen as a professional rather than just Natalie's less successful sister. I noticed Natalie watching our interaction from across the room, her expression unreadable, but her attention unmistakable. Our conversation was eventually interrupted when Emma, a junior executive I'd been introduced to earlier, joined us. Harold, the A/V team needs you to approve the presentation setup, she said. Harold excused himself, but not before saying, we should continue this discussion later, Samantha. We occasionally need freelance design work when our in-house team is overloaded. As he walked away, Emma lingered. So you're Natalie's artistic sister, she said, her tone friendly, but her eyes assessing. She doesn't talk about you much. We have different lives, I replied diplomatically. Different, she laughed lightly. From what I gather, it's like comparing a rocket ship to a paper airplane. She seemed to realize how this sounded and quickly added, not that there's anything wrong with paper airplanes. They're much more accessible to most people. With that backhanded attempt at recovery, she excused herself to speak with another colleague. Left momentarily alone as Jason went to get us fresh drinks, I overheard snippets of conversation from a nearby group. That's the other Thompson sister, someone murmured. The one who didn't go to Princeton, another voice replied with subtle emphasis on didn't. I pretended to be absorbed in the view from the windows, fighting the familiar feeling of inadequacy that always seemed to find me at family gatherings, now expanded to include my sister's professional circle. When Jason returned with our drinks, I whispered, I need 5 minutes away from these people. He nodded understandingly, and we found a relatively quiet corner near an elaborate floral arrangement. How are you holding up? He asked. About as well as expected, I admitted. Everyone here measures success in promotions and profit margins. I don't think they'd recognize creative fulfillment if it introduced itself with business cards. Jason squeezed my hand. Their opinion doesn't define you, Sam. Before I could respond, Natalie appeared beside us, momentarily separated from her admirers. There you are, she said, as if we'd been deliberately hiding. The speeches will be starting soon. You should find your seats at table 7. I saw an opportunity for connection and took it. Natalie, I really am happy for you. This is a huge achievement. For a moment, something like genuine emotion flickered across her face. Thanks, she said, and for that brief second, she was just my sister, not my competitor. It's been a lot of work to get here. I'm sure it has, I agreed. Your dedication has always been incredible. She seemed about to say something else when Gabrielle, the marketing director, approached to discuss some last-minute detail about the presentation. Natalie immediately switched back to professional mode, our moment of connection evaporating as quickly as it had appeared. As we made our way to our assigned table, located noticeably far from the central tables where Natalie and the executives would sit, I tried to hold on to that fleeting moment of sisterly recognition. Maybe there was still hope for us after all. As the formal portion of the evening began, the ambient lighting dimmed slightly and a spotlight illuminated a small stage area where a podium had been set up. The company CEO, a polished woman named Victoria Stone, approached the microphone first. Tonight, we celebrate not just a promotion, but a rising star who exemplifies everything Brenner and Stone stands for, she began, launching into a glowing introduction of Natalie's accomplishments. I listened as Victoria detailed my sister's meteoric rise within the company, the major accounts she'd secured, the innovative campaigns she'd spearheaded, the revenue growth she'd generated. With each achievement mentioned, applause rippled through the room, and I found myself clapping along, genuinely impressed by what Natalie had accomplished. Various executives took turns sharing anecdotes about Natalie's dedication and talent. Harold Brenner spoke about her unparalleled work ethic and razor-sharp strategic mind. The praise was effusive, but from what I could tell, sincere. Finally, Victoria called Natalie to the stage, presenting her with an engraved crystal award that caught the light as she accepted it. The room erupted in enthusiastic applause, and I felt a complicated mix of pride and that familiar twinge of inadequacy. As the applause subsided, Natalie adjusted the microphone and surveyed the room with confident poise. "Thank you all so much for this recognition and for being here tonight," she began, her voice warm and assured. "When I joined Brenner and Stone 6 years ago, I knew I'd found my professional home. The mentorship and opportunities I've received here have been extraordinary." She went on to thank specific colleagues for their support, acknowledging her team members and the executive leadership. Her gratitude seemed genuine, and I found myself smiling at this side of my sister I rarely got to see, accomplished, respected, and gracious. "I'd also like to thank my boyfriend, Ethan, for his unwavering support," she continued, gesturing toward him as a smattering of applause broke out. "And of course, my family, my parents, who instilled in me the drive to succeed from an early age. Our parents weren't present, having scheduled a cruise that overlapped with the event, but Natalie acknowledged them anyway." Then she paused, and her gaze found me in the crowd. "And my sister, Samantha, who's here tonight." All eyes in the room shifted momentarily to where Jason and I sat, and I felt a flush creeping up my neck at the sudden attention. "It's interesting how different two people from the same family can be," Natalie continued, a new edge entering her voice. "We took such different paths. While I was pulling all-nighters to finish my MBA, Sam was finding herself through art." The way she said finding herself made it sound frivolous, indulgent. "I sometimes think about nature versus nurture and how we end up where we do in life. The choices we make, the priorities we set." Her smile remained in place, but her eyes had hardened slightly. "I guess in every family dynamic, there are different roles to play. The achiever and—" She paused, her gaze locking with mine. "Well, someone had to play the failure." The word hung in the air like a gunshot. A few uncomfortable laughs scattered through the audience, quickly fading into awkward silence. My cheeks burned as I felt dozens of eyes on me, some embarrassed, some curious, some barely concealing their amusement at my public humiliation. Beside me, Jason's hand tightened around mine, his face a mask of controlled anger on my behalf. I sat frozen, unable to process that my sister had just deliberately degraded me in front of a room full of strangers at what should have been her moment of professional triumph. The champagne in my stomach curdled as Natalie continued her speech as if she hadn't just driven a knife into my heart, her voice carrying on about goals and teamwork while I fought to maintain my composure. I wanted nothing more than to flee, to escape the pitying glances now being cast in my direction, but some stubborn part of me refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing me run. So I sat there, back straight, face burning, as my sister completed her speech to renewed applause. The success of her career juxtaposed against her failure as a sister had never been more starkly apparent. As she left the podium, I caught the self-satisfied smirk that flickered across her face when our eyes met briefly across the room. In that moment, I understood that this hadn't been an accidental slight or a poorly considered joke. It had been deliberate. She had wanted to establish her superiority over me in front of her colleagues, to ensure that everyone knew exactly where I stood in the hierarchy of success. The realization felt like ice water in my veins, shocking and clarifying at once. This was who my sister had become, or perhaps who she had always been, just with better manners in place until now. I sat immobilized by hurt and humiliation as the room resumed its casual chatter, the moment already fading for everyone except me. "We should go," Jason whispered, his protective instinct in full force. "I'm not leaving," I whispered back, surprising myself with the steel in my voice. "I won't give her the satisfaction." Jason nodded, his expression a mix of concern and pride. "Then we stay, and we hold our heads high." I nodded, blinking back tears that threatened to spill over. I would not cry here, not where she could see. The evening stretched before me like an endless gauntlet, but something had shifted inside me. The hurt was still there, raw and throbbing, but beneath it was something else, a slow-burning anger that felt strangely empowering after years of accepting my assigned role as the lesser sister. As the uncomfortable murmurs following Natalie's speech began to subside, I noticed a subtle movement at the head table. Harold Brenner was leaning over to whisper something to Victoria Stone, his expression serious. She nodded, her perfectly maintained professional smile faltering for just a moment. Harold stood and approached the podium, gently tapping the microphone to recapture the room's attention. "If I could just say a few additional words," he began, his authoritative voice immediately quieting the scattered conversations. Natalie, who had been accepting congratulations from colleagues, turned to look at her boss with surprise. She hadn't expected anyone else to speak after her. Harold adjusted his glasses and surveyed the room with the calm confidence of someone accustomed to commanding attention. "Success is an interesting concept," he began. "In my 40 years in business, I've seen it defined and redefined countless times." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the assembled guests before briefly resting on me. "When I was about 30, at what I thought was the height of my career, my younger brother was struggling to establish himself as a photographer. Our family, particularly our father, saw his pursuit as impractical, even irresponsible. A subtle tension rippled through the room as people began to realize this wasn't just an afterthought to Natalie's speech. I'm ashamed to admit that I shared that view. I measured success by promotions, by income, by the external validation of peers and superiors. Harold removed his glasses, polishing them thoughtfully before continuing. Then my brother got his first gallery showing. I went reluctantly, expecting to see amateurish work that I could politely compliment before returning to my real career. His voice softened with the memory. Instead, I saw the world through his eyes, beauty, pain, truth captured in ways I'd never considered. It humbled me profoundly. The room was completely silent now, every person present hanging on his words. I realized that night that success isn't a single path or a uniform measure. True success, I've come to believe, is finding the courage to pursue what makes you come alive, regardless of whether it fits conventional definitions. His gaze shifted to Natalie, who was now watching him with a slightly perplexed expression. Natalie is absolutely deserving of this promotion and recognition. Her work here has been exceptional by every metric we value at Brenner and Stone. He let this affirmation sink in before adding, but I've always maintained that the most important metric of success is character, how we treat others, especially those who take different paths from our own. The implication of his words was unmistakable. Several people near me shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others darted glances between Harold, Natalie, and me. I had the pleasure of speaking briefly with Samantha Thompson earlier this evening, Harold continued, catching me by surprise at the mention of my name. What struck me was her passion for design work that prioritizes authentic expression over mass appeal, something many of our clients could benefit from in this age of generic corporate aesthetics. I felt a rush of unexpected emotion at this public recognition of my professional value from someone of Harold's stature. Different paths, different measures of success, but equally valid and worthy of respect, he concluded, his voice gentle but firm. That's something I hope we all remember, not just in our professional assessments, but in our personal relationships as well. With a final nod that somehow managed to encompass both Natalie and me, Harold stepped away from the podium. The silence that followed was profound, eventually broken by scattered applause that grew in strength. I noticed several people glancing at me with new interest, while others were looking at Natalie with expressions ranging from curiosity to subtle judgment. Natalie herself stood rigid, her smile frozen in place, but her eyes burning with a mixture of confusion and anger. She clearly hadn't expected her moment of triumph to be reframed in this way. As the formal program concluded and people began to mingle again, Harold made his way directly to our table. "Samantha," he said, extending his hand. "I hope I didn't overstep just now." "Not at all," I managed, still processing what had happened. "Thank you for your words." "They were entirely sincere," he assured me. "And actually, I'd like to discuss something with you. We have a new client, a boutique hotel chain looking to differentiate themselves with authentic local art and design elements. Your perspective could be valuable to this project." He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a business card. "Call my office next week if you're interested. Ask for Denise. She'll put you straight through." Before I could fully process this unexpected professional opportunity, Natalie materialized at Harold's side, her composure restored, but her eyes flashing with barely contained emotion. "Harold, the Westridge team was hoping to speak with you about their campaign launch," she said pointedly. Harold nodded but didn't immediately move. "We'll talk soon, Samantha," he said, giving me a meaningful look before allowing Natalie to guide him away. As they walked off, I saw Natalie lean in to say something to him, her expression intense. Jason squeezed my hand under the table. "Did that just happen?" he whispered. "I think it did," I replied, staring at the business card in my hand as if it might disappear at any moment. For the next half hour, the dynamic of the evening shifted subtly but significantly. Several of Natalie's colleagues approached our table, introducing themselves more thoroughly and asking genuine questions about my work. Emma, who had earlier made the paper airplane comparison, now seemed eager to discuss a logo redesign her department was considering. Even Ethan made his way over at one point, his attitude notably more respectful as he inquired about current trends in digital design. Throughout it all, I could feel Natalie watching from across the room, her perfect evening taking a turn she hadn't anticipated. For the first time in our adult lives, I wasn't just her less successful sister, I was someone whose different path had been publicly validated by a person she deeply respected. The balance of power had shifted, however slightly, and we both knew it. I was speaking with a creative director from Natalie's firm when I felt a hand grasp my elbow firmly. "Can I speak with you for a moment?" Natalie's voice was controlled but tight. "Privately." Without waiting for my response, she guided me toward a small side room off the main event space. Jason caught my eye, silently asking if I needed him to intervene, but I gave a small shake of my head. This confrontation had been brewing for years. It was time to face it directly. The room Natalie led me to appeared to be a small conference room, now serving as a storage area for extra chairs and catering supplies. She closed the door behind us, then turned to face me, her professional mask slipping to reveal raw anger. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" she demanded, arms crossed defensively across her chest. "What am I doing?" I repeated, genuinely confused. "Standing there while your boss publicly undercut me," she clarified, her voice rising slightly. "Do you have any idea how that looked?" The absurdity of her accusation momentarily stunned me. How it looked? "Natalie, you just called me a failure in front of an entire room of people. Your colleagues. Your boss." I was making a joke, she insisted, though we both knew it had been nothing of the sort. "And somehow you turned it into an opportunity to make me look bad on what should have been my night." "I didn't do anything," I said, my own anger finally breaking through. "Harold made his own observations based on how you chose to treat me." "How you've always treated me." Natalie scoffed. "Oh, please, don't start with the victim routine. You've always been so sensitive about everything." "Sensitive?" You publicly humiliated me, and I'm supposed to just laugh it off. My voice shook with emotion I'd suppressed for too long. You know what, Natalie? I've spent my entire life trying to be happy for you, to support your achievements even while you belittled mine. I've shown up, I've smiled, I've deflected every condescending comment and backhanded compliment. And for what? So you could use your biggest professional moment to put me in my place. Something in my tone must have penetrated her defensive shield because her expression shifted slightly. You act like I've had everything handed to me, she said, her voice lower but still intense. Do you have any idea how hard I've worked to get here? Of course I do, I replied. I've watched you climb every step of the corporate ladder. I've never questioned your work ethic or your talent, Natalie. What I don't understand is why my different path threatens you so much that you needed to diminish it publicly. Threatens me. She laughed, but it sounded hollow. Why would I be threatened by someone who can barely make rent? The words stung, but I refused to be derailed. If you're so secure in your choices, why do you constantly need to compare them to mine? Why use your speech tonight to establish your superiority instead of just celebrating your achievement? Natalie turned away slightly, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against her arm. When she spoke again, her voice had lost some of its edge. You have no idea what it's like to be the one everyone expects to succeed. Do you know how terrified I am of failure? One misstep, and everything I've built could collapse. The admission surprised me. In all our years of rivalry, she had never acknowledged any vulnerability. At least you got to choose your path, she continued unexpectedly. Mom and Dad just assumed I'd follow in their footsteps. College, business school, corporate career. There was never a question. Choose. I repeated incredulously. Natalie, I wanted their approval just as much as you did. The difference is you could get it by doing what they valued, while I was constantly trying to make them see value in something they didn't understand or respect. We stood in silence for a moment, the years of misunderstanding and competition hanging between us. Do you know what I thought when I saw your work in that student showcase senior year? Natalie asked suddenly. The one with the experimental mixed media pieces? I nodded, surprised she even remembered it. I was jealous, she admitted quietly. Not of the art itself, but of how completely yourself you seemed when you were talking about it. I've never felt that kind of, I don't know, alignment between who I am and what I do. The confession left me momentarily speechless. But you're so successful, I finally said. You have everything. The career, the boyfriend, the condo. I have what looks like success, she corrected. Don't get me wrong, I'm good at what I do, and I've earned everything I've achieved. But sometimes I wonder what it would be like to pursue something just because it calls to me, not because it's what's expected. It was the most honest conversation we'd had in years, possibly ever. The artificial roles we'd been assigned, and had eventually assigned ourselves, were momentarily set aside, revealing the complex people beneath. For what it's worth, I said carefully, I've always admired your determination, even when it made me feel inadequate by comparison. Natalie's expression softened slightly, and I've admired your courage to pursue what fulfills you, even without the validation I've always needed. Before we could explore this newfound understanding further, my phone buzzed with a text from our mother. Natalie's phone chimed simultaneously. Mom, we both said in unison, sharing a brief moment of sisterly recognition. The text was inquiring about the event, asking for photos of Natalie's big moment. The intrusion of our parents, even from a distance, seemed to reactivate old patterns. Natalie straightened her posture, professional mask slipping back into place. We should get back out there, she said, though with less hostility than before. People will be wondering where I went. As we moved toward the door, I placed a hand on her arm. Natalie, about what Harold said, the potential project. I won't pursue it if you're uncomfortable with me working with your company. She paused, considering this. It's a good opportunity, she finally said. And frankly, after tonight, turning it down would look worse for me than accepting it would. It wasn't exactly a blessing, but it was something. As we rejoined the party, Our interaction had shifted, not dramatically transformed, but altered in subtle ways that suggested the possibility of change. The next morning, my phone rang with my mother's name displayed on the screen. I hesitated before answering, already anticipating the conversation. "Samantha," she began without preamble. "What happened last night?" "Natalie sounds upset." I took a deep breath. "Did she tell you what she said during her speech?" "She mentioned there was a misunderstanding," my mother replied vaguely. "But honestly, couldn't you have just been supportive for one night?" This was a big moment for her. The familiar pattern of assumption, that any conflict between us must be my fault, ignited a new resolve in me. "Mom," I said firmly, "for years I've listened to you and Dad compare us, always finding me wanting. Last night, Natalie called me a failure in front of her entire company. Her boss stepped in because he recognized how inappropriate that was, not because I did anything." There was a startled silence on the other end of the line. "She called you a failure?" my mother finally asked, her tone suggesting she found this hard to believe. Her exact words were, "Someone had to play the failure," I confirmed. And instead of apologizing, she blamed me for her boss's reaction. Another silence, longer this time. "I didn't know," my mother finally said, her voice smaller than I was accustomed to hearing it. "You never asked," I pointed out. "You've always assumed that Natalie's version of events is the correct one." "That's not fair," she protested, but with less conviction than I expected. "Isn't it?" I challenged gently. "When's the last time you asked about my work with genuine interest? Or acknowledged that success might look different for different people?" The question hung between us, uncomfortable but necessary. "I just want you to be secure," she finally said. "To not struggle the way we did when you were young." It was the first time she'd acknowledged that motivation, and it helped me understand her perspective, even if I didn't agree with it. "I appreciate that," I said. "But I need you to understand that I've chosen my path deliberately, not because I couldn't succeed on Natalie's path. And I need you to respect that choice, even if you don't fully understand it." The conversation continued, more honest than our usual exchanges, though not without its difficult moments. By the end, nothing was fully resolved, but something had shifted. My mother promised to reflect on her role in our sibling rivalry, and I promised to be more direct about my feelings rather than letting resentment build. 3 days after the party, I called Harold Brenner's office as suggested. His assistant Denise put me through immediately, as promised. "Samantha," Harold greeted me warmly. "I'm glad you called. Are you interested in discussing the Meridian Hotels project?" "I am," I confirmed. "Though I want to be sure this won't create additional tension with Natalie." "Your sister is a professional," Harold said confidently. "And more importantly, your aesthetic is precisely what this client is looking for. Authentic, distinctive, with a sense of place that their current branding lacks." We discussed the project parameters, timeline, and compensation, which was significantly more generous than I'd anticipated. By the end of the call, I had agreed to develop initial concepts for the hotel chain's rebranding, with the potential for an ongoing relationship if the initial phase was successful. When I hung up, I sat in stunned silence for several minutes, processing this unexpected opportunity. Later that day, I received a text from Natalie. "Harold told me about the Meridian project. It's a good fit for your style." It wasn't exactly effusive support, but coming from Natalie, it felt like a significant olive branch. I replied with a simple, "Thank you. That means a lot." Her response came quickly, "Just don't make me look bad by association." Followed immediately by another text. "That was supposed to be a joke." "I'm working on it." And for the first time in years, I found myself smiling at a message from my sister. The 6 months following Natalie's promotion party brought changes I couldn't have anticipated that night when I'd stood humiliated before a room of strangers. The Meridian Hotels project turned out to be exactly the kind of work I'd always wanted: creative freedom within professional parameters, with clients who valued authentic expression over corporate blandness. My concepts for their rebranding were enthusiastically received, leading to a comprehensive contract not just for their visual identity, but for ongoing design work across their properties. The financial stability this provided allowed me to be more selective with my other clients, focusing on projects that aligned with my creative vision rather than simply taking whatever would pay the bills. I was able to move from my cramped apartment to a modest but charming two-bedroom with enough space for a proper home office and studio area. Jason helped me paint and set up the new space, his pride in my success evident in every encouraging word and supportive gesture. "You know what's different about you lately?" he asked one evening as we sat on my new couch, takeout containers spread across the coffee table. "Besides the fact that I can now afford real food instead of ramen?" I joked. "You stand taller," he said seriously. "You always had talent, but now you have confidence to match it." He was right. Something fundamental had shifted in how I viewed myself and my work. The validation from Harold and the subsequent professional opportunities had helped, certainly, but the greater change had come from within, from finally confronting the family dynamics that had shaped my self-perception for so long. 2 months after the party, I started seeing a therapist named Leanne, who specialized in family dynamics and adult sibling relationships. Our weekly sessions helped me unpack years of comparative judgment and internalized messaging about what constituted real success. "What I'm hearing," Leanne observed during one particularly insightful session, "is that you've spent much of your life trying to earn approval using a value system that doesn't align with your own." This simple framing helped me recognize how I'd been setting myself up for failure by trying to succeed on terms that weren't authentic to who I was. With Leanne's guidance, I began establishing healthier boundaries with my family. I declined invitations to gatherings that historically had devolved into comparisons and criticism. When I did see my parents, I gently but firmly redirected conversations that slipped into old patterns. "I notice we're comparing again," became my calm refrain when my father would juxtapose my recent design award with Natalie's quarterly bonus. Sometimes they caught themselves, sometimes they didn't, but I no longer allowed their metrics to define my worth. My relationship with Natalie evolved in fits and starts. The raw honesty of our confrontation at the party had cracked open a door that neither of us seemed quite ready to walk through fully, but neither were we willing to slam it shut again. We began meeting for coffee once a month, awkward at first, then gradually more comfortable as we learned to relate to each other as adults rather than as competing siblings. During our third meetup, Natalie surprised me by asking detailed questions about my creative process for the Meridian project. "I don't think I've ever really understood how you work," she admitted. "In my world, everything is data and strategy and measurable outcomes. And in mine, it's intuition and visual language and emotional response," I replied. "Different languages for different purposes." She nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe that's why we've never really been able to communicate well. We're literally speaking different languages." It was an insight that helped frame our ongoing efforts to understand each other. I learned about the pressures Natalie faced in her high-stakes corporate environment, the constant need to prove herself in male-dominated meetings, the way her perfectionism was both her greatest strength and her heaviest burden. She began to appreciate the courage required to pursue a creative path without the safety net of organizational structure, the discipline needed to maintain a freelance career, the integrity involved in refusing projects that didn't align with my values despite financial temptation. We were building, if not the close sisterly bond depicted in greeting cards, at least a relationship based on mutual respect and authentic understanding. Our parents were slower to adapt. After decades of parenting according to a particular success narrative, they struggled to expand their perspective. But my mother made more effort than I'd expected, occasionally sending me articles about innovative design work or asking specific questions about my current projects. My father remained more distant, though there was a noticeable decrease in his comparative comments. The holiday season brought the ultimate test of our evolving family dynamic, Thanksgiving dinner at my parents' home, with both Natalie and me attending with our respective partners. In previous years, Such gatherings had been minefields of subtle digs and painful comparisons. This time, I arrived with both boundaries and compassion firmly in place. The difference was immediately apparent. My mother had made a point of displaying the framed advertisement featuring my design work for Meridian on the living room wall, alongside Natalie's corporate awards. My father, though still more comfortable discussing Natalie's world, made a visible effort to engage with Jason about his teaching career. When the conversation inevitably turned to work, I shared news of my recent success with a high-profile restaurant chain without diminishing it or waiting for someone else to do so. Natalie spoke of challenges with a difficult client, acknowledging moments of self-doubt that she would never have revealed in the past. After dinner, as we helped clear the table, Natalie leaned over to whisper, "Is it just me, or is this the least stressful family dinner we've ever had?" "Definitely not just you," I confirmed, though I still have a therapy appointment scheduled for tomorrow, just in case. She laughed, a genuine sound without the competitive edge I'd grown accustomed to hearing. "Maybe I should look into that therapy thing too," she said, half joking but with an undertone of sincerity. "It seems to be working for you." Later that evening, as Jason and I drove home, he remarked on the change. "That was almost a normal family gathering," he said with mock astonishment. "Only mild tension instead of seismic." I smiled, watching the familiar streets pass by with new eyes. "We're all learning," I said. Slowly, imperfectly, but learning. The truth was, healing family relationships built on decades of unhealthy patterns couldn't happen overnight. There were still awkward moments, occasional backsliding into old roles, times when a careless word would reactivate old wounds. But there was also growth, increased awareness, and genuine effort from all sides. As for my professional life, the Meridian project led to connections with other clients who valued authentic design over corporate conformity. My portfolio expanded to include work I was genuinely proud of, not just pieces that paid the bills. Harold became something of a mentor, occasionally recommending me for projects that suited my aesthetic and introducing me to contacts throughout the industry. I even collaborated with Natalie on a campaign for one of her smaller clients, a challenging but ultimately rewarding experience that demonstrated how our different perspectives could complement rather than compete with each other. Through it all, I came to understand that success wasn't a finite resource that Natalie and I had to fight over. Her achievements didn't diminish mine. My fulfillment didn't threaten hers. We had both been shaped by a family narrative that pitted us against each other, but we weren't obligated to continue that story into our adult lives. On a crisp spring morning, almost exactly a year after the promotion party incident, I met Natalie for our now regular coffee. She seemed preoccupied, stirring her latte absently while I told her about a new project. "Sorry," she said, catching herself. "I'm listening, I promise. It's just..." She hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. "Ethan and I broke up last night." "Oh," I said, surprised but not entirely shocked. Their relationship had always seemed more strategic than passionate. "Are you okay?" She considered the question carefully. "Yes and no. It was my decision, but it still feels unsettling. Like I'm deviating from the script." "The script." She nodded. "Perfect career, perfect partner, perfect life. I've been following it so long, I'm not sure who I am without it." It was perhaps the most vulnerable I'd ever seen her. "Maybe that's something worth discovering," I suggested gently. She looked up from her coffee, a mixture of fear and possibility in her expression. "Maybe it is." As we continued talking, I realized how far we'd both come from that night when she'd publicly branded me a failure. We weren't just sisters by birth anymore. We were becoming sisters by choice, slowly building a relationship based on who we actually were rather than the roles we'd been assigned. It wasn't perfect. Nothing real ever is, but it was authentic in a way our previous interactions had never been. And in that authenticity, we were both finding a kind of success that couldn't be measured by promotions or paychecks, awards or accolades. It was the success of becoming fully ourselves, of defining our own worth rather than accepting the definitions imposed by others. Have you ever had a family member who consistently undermined your choices or your path in life? How did you handle it? Did you confront them or find another way to establish your boundaries? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing it with someone who might need to hear that they get to define their own success. Remember, healing family relationships takes time, honesty, and sometimes the courage to stand up for yourself even when it's uncomfortable. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you the strength to write your own. I'm Natalie, 34, a marketing executive from Boston with what seemed like the perfect life. My husband Robert, our adorable 7-year-old daughter Sophie, and our cozy suburban home looked picture perfect on social media. But beneath that facade lay a painful reality. My mother-in-law Virginia never truly accepted me or my daughter. Last Christmas, she gave lavish gifts to all her grandchildren, iPads, jewelry, cash, but nothing for Sophie. The devastation in my daughter's eyes shattered my heart. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe if you've ever had to protect your child from toxic family members who were supposed to love them. I grew up in a middle-class family in Portland. Nothing fancy, but we had enough. My parents taught me the value of hard work and education, which propelled me through college on partial scholarships and part-time jobs. That's where I met Robert during my junior year. Robert came from a completely different world. The only child of wealthy, status-conscious parents, he'd been groomed for success from birth. His father owned a successful investment firm, and his mother, Virginia, served on charity boards and maintained their social standing. When Robert's father passed away 3 years ago, Virginia became even more controlling of their family legacy. Our love story wasn't planned. We met in an economics class where we were paired for a semester project. I found his privileged perspective frustrating at first, but over late-night study sessions, I discovered a thoughtful, kind man beneath the polished exterior. For Robert, my practical outlook and independence were refreshing after years of dating women his mother had essentially pre-approved, including his ex-fiancée Clarissa, daughter of his father's business partner. When Robert broke off his engagement to Clarissa and started dating me, Virginia was furious. I still remember our first meeting at an upscale restaurant where she examined me like a specimen under a microscope, asking pointed questions about my family background and career aspirations. Her disapproval was thinly veiled behind practiced smiles. Natalie has such unique ideas about her career, she told Robert, as if I wasn't sitting right there. But I wonder if she understands the responsibilities of being part of our family. Despite Virginia's objections, Robert proposed 6 months later. We married in a smaller ceremony than Virginia had envisioned for her only son. She attended with a pinched expression, making comments about how we'd rushed into things and questioning if we were truly compatible. Robert assured me her attitude would change with time. When I became pregnant with Sophie a year later, I hoped it would soften Virginia's heart. The pregnancy was difficult from the start: severe morning sickness, gestational diabetes, and finally complications that led to an emergency C-section at 36 weeks. Robert was by my side throughout, but Virginia maintained a strange distance, visiting briefly after Sophie's birth with expensive but impersonal baby gifts. Still, she seemed genuinely excited about becoming a grandmother. She cooed over Sophie and took dozens of photos to show her friends. For the first time, I felt a glimmer of hope that we might develop a real relationship. As Sophie grew, Virginia occasionally offered to babysit, though these offers often came with subtle criticisms about our parenting. She should really be speaking more clearly by now, or the other grandchildren were potty trained much earlier. I brushed these comments aside, grateful for any bond forming between Sophie and her grandmother. Robert maintained a close relationship with his mother, weekly phone calls and monthly family dinners at her home. He'd been raised to prioritize family loyalty above all, and despite our occasional disagreements about his mother's behavior, he couldn't bear disappointing her. I tried everything to win Virginia's approval. I learned to cook her favorite recipes, remembered her preferences for everything from coffee to home decor, and always sent thoughtful thank you notes for every gift or dinner invitation. Sophie would make special artwork for her grandmother's refrigerator, proud little masterpieces that would mysteriously disappear by our next visit. Robert had several cousins with children around Sophie's age, 5 other grandchildren that Virginia doted on, despite not being her direct bloodline. There was Alexander and Amanda, 11-year-old twins from Robert's cousin William, 9-year-old Olivia from cousin Jennifer, 6-year-old Jason from cousin Michael, and 4-year-old Lily from cousin Elizabeth. Whenever I noticed Virginia treating these children differently from Sophie, more expensive gifts, more affectionate greetings, more photos displayed in her home, Robert would say I was being oversensitive. Mom's just more comfortable with William's kids because she's known them longer, or Jennifer and Mom have always been close, so of course she spoils Olivia. Sophie never complained. She was such a sweet child, always looking for the good in people. She had inherited Robert's artistic talent and my determination. She would spend hours creating the perfect drawing or card for Virginia, hoping for her grandmother's approval. Watching her try so hard broke my heart, but I encouraged these efforts, hoping Virginia would eventually see how special Sophie was. Each year, Virginia hosted an elaborate Christmas gathering at her mansion. Family members from across the country would attend, with the highlight being her generous gift-giving ceremony. Sophie had been talking about this Christmas for months, especially excited because she'd overheard her cousins mentioning the possibility of new iPads. "Do you think Grandma will get me one too?" she asked repeatedly. I cautiously suggested she shouldn't get her hopes too high, but secretly prayed Virginia would include her equally this year. As December approached, Sophie carefully selected a gift for her grandmother, a handmade jewelry box she'd crafted in her art class, painted with Virginia's favorite colors and lined with soft fabric. "Grandma will love this, right, Mommy?" she asked, her eyes shining with hope. "I made it just for her special things." "It's beautiful, sweetheart," I assured her, pushing down my anxiety. "You put so much love into it." The night before the Christmas gathering, I laid out Sophie's special holiday dress, emerald green velvet with a red sash, her patent leather shoes polished to a shine. As she twirled in front of the mirror, I caught Robert's eye across the room. "She looks just like you did in that childhood photo at your mother's house," I said pointedly. Robert smiled. "She does, doesn't she? Mom will love seeing her all dressed up." I wanted to believe him. I really did. Virginia's home was a showcase of seasonal perfection when we arrived for Christmas dinner. A 14-foot tree dominated the entryway, professionally decorated in gold and burgundy. Garlands draped every staircase and fireplace mantel, while the scent of pine and cinnamon filled the air. Staff in formal attire circulated with trays of appetizers and champagne. "Grandma's house looks like a Christmas movie," Sophie whispered, clutching her carefully wrapped gift. Virginia greeted each family as they arrived, air-kissing the adults and embracing the children. When our turn came, she hugged Robert warmly, gave me a brief nod, and patted Sophie's head without bending down to her level, as she had with the other grandchildren. "Robert, darling, you look tired. Is work keeping you too busy?" she asked, completely ignoring my new haircut and the compliment I'd offered on her home. "Just end-of-year deadlines, Mom." "Everything's fine," Robert replied, squeezing my hand as if to apologize for his mother's behavior. The cousins arrived in quick succession. William and his wife Rebecca with the twins Alexander and Amanda, Jennifer and her husband David with Olivia, Michael and his wife Stephanie with Jason, and Elizabeth with her daughter Lily. Each family received the same warm welcome, with Virginia making special fuss over each grandchild. "Alexander, Amanda, look how tall you've grown." And Olivia, That dress is stunning on you. Jason, Grandma has a special surprise for you later. And little Lily, aren't you just the prettiest thing in the room? The children quickly formed their own group, running off to play in the specially designated playroom. Sophie followed, eager to join her cousins, but I noticed Alexander whisper something to Amanda while looking at Sophie, causing both to giggle. Sophie pretended not to notice, her smile faltering only slightly. Virginia's housekeeper announced dinner an hour later. The dining room table extended to its full length, covered in fine china, crystal, and elaborate centerpieces. Name cards marked each place, and I immediately noticed Sophie had been seated at the small children's table in the corner, while the other grandchildren were integrated among the adults at the main table. Virginia, there seems to be a mistake with the seating, I said quietly. Sophie's at the children's table, but Lily is younger and she's at the main table. Virginia's smile didn't reach her eyes. Lily is still so small, she needs her mother's help with cutting food. Sophie's quite independent, isn't she? I thought she'd enjoy being in charge of the children's table. Before I could protest further, Robert placed his hand on my arm. It's just seating, Natalie. Let's not make an issue of it. The dinner progressed with Virginia holding court, discussing her recent charity gala and soliciting updates from each family member except me. When I attempted to share news about my recent promotion, she smoothly interrupted to ask Elizabeth about Lily's dance recital. After the elaborate meal and dessert, Virginia announced it was time for the gift exchange. This was a treasured family tradition, with Virginia taking particular pride in selecting the perfect gift for each person. The family gathered in the formal living room, where wrapped presents surrounded the base of the Christmas tree. Now, I'll start with my precious grandchildren, Virginia announced, lifting an elegantly wrapped box. Alexander, this is for you. Alexander tore into the package to reveal the latest iPad model with a personalized leather case embossed with his initials. This is awesome, Grandma. Thank you. Amanda, you're next, Virginia continued, handing over an identical box. Amanda received the same iPad, but with a different colored case. Virginia continued down her list. Olivia, I selected this specially for you. Olivia unwrapped a velvet box containing a delicate pearl necklace, bracelet, and earring set. For when you grow up, Virginia explained. Every proper young lady needs pearls. Jason was next, receiving the gaming console he'd been wanting for months, along with 3 games. His excited shouts filled the room as Virginia beamed at his reaction. And for my littlest granddaughter, Lily. Virginia handed over a large box that contained a handcrafted dollhouse, an exact miniature replica of Virginia's own home. I've also established a savings bond for your future, darling. Throughout this process, Sophie sat quietly, her eyes growing wider with each elaborate gift. Her small hands clutched the handmade present she'd brought for her grandmother. I could see the anticipation on her face, mixed with growing anxiety as the pile of gifts dwindled. Virginia gathered the empty wrapping paper and announced, "Now for the adults," completely skipping over Sophie. Sophie looked at me, confusion evident in her eyes. I caught Robert's gaze across the room, silently pleading with him to say something. He gave me a subtle head shake, mouthing, "Leave it alone." After a moment of awkward silence, Sophie spoke up in a small voice. "Grandma, is there a present for me too?" The room fell silent. Virginia looked at Sophie as if just remembering she existed. "Oh, I must have forgotten. Maybe next time." The casual cruelty of her words hung in the air. Robert quickly pulled out his wallet and extracted several $20 bills. "Here, princess. Daddy's got something for you," he said, pressing the cash into her small hand. I noticed the uncomfortable glances exchanged between the other adults. Elizabeth looked particularly disturbed, pulling Lily closer as if to protect her from witnessing such behavior. Sophie clutched the money, her chin trembling slightly, but she forced a brave smile. "Thank you, Daddy." Then, remembering her own gift, she stood up and approached Virginia. I made this for you, Grandma. Virginia accepted the package with 2 fingers, as if it might soil her designer outfit. How creative, she said, setting it aside without opening it. Shall we continue with the adult gifts? I watched my daughter return to her seat, shoulders slumped but fighting back tears. My heart shattered into 1,000 pieces, while anger began to bubble up inside me. How dare she treat my child this way? And how could Robert just sit there? Sophie, sweetheart, let's go freshen up, I said, taking her hand and leading her toward the nearest bathroom before my emotions erupted in front of everyone. Once inside, I locked the door and knelt to her level. Sophie's eyes brimmed with tears she'd been bravely holding back. Doesn't Grandma love me like the others? She asked, her voice breaking. I pulled her into a tight hug, my own tears threatening. Of course she should love you, baby. You are amazing and wonderful and so lovable. Sometimes adults have their own problems that make them act in ways that hurt others. It's not your fault. But Alexander said Grandma always gives the best presents to real family, Sophie whispered against my shoulder. My blood ran cold. You are real family, Sophie. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise. After helping her wash her face and taking a moment to compose myself, we returned to the gathering. Virginia was acting as if nothing had happened, now distributing gifts to the adults with exaggerated enthusiasm. I noticed she'd given Robert an expensive watch, while my gift was a generic scarf that still had the clearance tag partially attached. I waited until Virginia went to the kitchen to supervise the coffee service before following her. Virginia, I need to speak with you, I said, closing the kitchen door behind me. She barely glanced up from arranging cookies on a silver tray. If it's about the gift, I simply forgot. Children get too many presents these days anyway. You didn't forget. You deliberately excluded Sophie while lavishing expensive gifts on your other grandchildren. Why? Virginia set down the tray and turned to face me, her expression cold. She's not really family. Your previous relationship, your daughter from another man. Robert deserves better than raising another man's child. I stepped back as if slept. What are you talking about? Sophie is Robert's biological daughter. I never had a child before meeting Robert. Please, Virginia scoffed. The family isn't blind. She doesn't have our features. And I know you were pregnant before you trapped my son into marriage. My mind raced, trying to make sense of her delusion. Who told you this lie? Virginia waved dismissively. Everyone knows. Clarissa's mother told me all about your history. And the timing of your wedding and Sophie's birth speaks for itself. I left the kitchen in a daze, searching for Robert. I found him laughing with his cousins, completely oblivious to the bomb his mother had just dropped on me. Robert, I need to speak with you. Now. I pulled him into the hallway, away from curious ears. What's wrong? Is Sophie okay? He asked. Did you know your mother believes Sophie isn't your biological daughter? I demanded. Robert's expression shifted from confusion to discomfort. Mom has mentioned some concerns before. Concerns? She's telling people I trapped you into raising another man's child. Why haven't you corrected her? He ran a hand through his hair. You know how Mom is. It's easier to just let her think what she wants. Easier? Your mother is excluding our daughter from family events, treating her like she doesn't belong, and you think that's easier. My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. Keep your voice down, Robert urged. Look, we know the truth. That's what matters. No, Robert. What matters is that your mother is emotionally abusing our daughter while you stand by and do nothing. Did you see Sophie's face when your mother skipped her during gifts? Did you hear what she asked me in the bathroom? Mom's getting older. She forgets things. You're making too big a deal of this. I stared at him in disbelief. You knew about these rumors and never told me. You've allowed your mother to treat Sophie this way for years. I've tried talking to her before, he said defensively. She doesn't listen. It's just easier to keep the peace. Keeping the peace at the expense of your daughter's feelings isn't being a father, Robert. It's being a coward. His face hardened. That's not fair, Natalie. I love Sophie. I gave her money so she wouldn't feel left out. Money doesn't replace the love and acceptance she deserves from her grandmother, I said, suddenly remembering a dozen small incidents I'd previously dismissed. The family photo last Easter where Virginia had positioned Sophie at the very edge so she could be easily cropped out. Sophie's birthday in September that Virginia forgot while remembering Alexander's birthday the very next week with an elaborate party. The shopping trip last month where Virginia had taken all the other grandchildren to buy winter clothes but claimed there wasn't room in the car for Sophie. The realization that Virginia's treatment of Sophie wasn't a one-time mistake but a deliberate, ongoing pattern of exclusion hit me like a physical blow. We need to leave. Now, I said, turning away from Robert. Don't overreact. We can't just walk out on Christmas dinner. Watch me. Before I could storm back to the living room, I felt a small tug on my dress. Sophie stood there, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. Why are you and Daddy fighting? She asked quietly. Robert knelt down. We're not fighting, Princess. Just having a grown-up discussion. Sophie looked between us, unconvinced. I noticed the other children peering around the corner, whispering among themselves about the drama unfolding. We're going home, sweetheart, I said, taking her hand. But what about dessert? And I didn't give Grandma my present yet, Sophie protested. I'll put it under the tree for you, Robert offered. I gathered our coats while Robert made awkward excuses to his family. Virginia didn't even come to the door to say goodbye, sending her housekeeper instead. The car ride home was painfully silent. Robert gripped the steering wheel too tightly, while Sophie sat quietly in the back seat, clutching the cash her father had given her as a substitute for her grandmother's love. Can I buy everyone presents with this money? She finally asked, breaking the silence. Her selflessness in the face of such hurt nearly broke me. That's very generous, sweetie, but this money is for you. I don't want it, she said softly. It makes my tummy feel bad. That night, after tucking Sophie into bed, I stood in our bedroom looking at family photos on the dresser. In every picture, Sophie had Robert's smile, his dimple on the left cheek, even the same cowlick in her hair. How could anyone look at her and not see Robert's daughter? The moment Sophie's bedroom door closed, the argument exploded. How long have you known your mother thinks Sophie isn't yours? I demanded, keeping my voice low enough not to carry down the hall. Robert loosened his tie, avoiding my eyes. She mentioned something when you were pregnant. I told her she was wrong. Clearly she didn't believe you. And you never thought to mention this to me? For 7 years. What good would it have done? You know how stubborn Mom is once she gets an idea in her head. So instead you've let her emotionally abuse our daughter? Let Sophie believe there's something wrong with her that makes her grandmother withhold love. My hands shook with rage. That's not fair. I've tried to make up for Mom's behavior. By throwing money at the problem? By telling me I'm overreacting? Your mother told me today that Sophie isn't real family because she believes I trapped you into raising another man's child. Those are her exact words, Robert. He sank onto the edge of the bed. I didn't know she was still thinking that. We need to do a DNA test, I said firmly. Show her proof that Sophie is your biological daughter. Robert's head snapped up. Absolutely not. That would just insult my mother more. Insult your mother? What about the insult to our daughter? To me? Your mother is spreading lies about my character and denying her own granddaughter. You don't understand family loyalty, Natalie. In my family, we don't air dirty laundry or create confrontations. No, you just silently enable toxic behavior and expect everyone else to suffer through it. I paced the room, struggling to control my volume. This isn't about family loyalty. This is about you being too afraid to stand up to your mother. That's not true. I love Sophie more than anything. Then prove it. Choose your family, your real family, over your mother's delusions. You're asking me to cut off my own mother. I'm asking you to protect your daughter from emotional harm. If you can't do that, maybe we need some time apart to figure things out. Robert grabbed a pillow from the bed. Fine. I'll sleep on the couch tonight. Maybe tomorrow we can discuss this more rationally. There's nothing irrational about wanting to protect my child, I said as he walked out. I sank onto the bed, letting tears fall freely now that I was alone. After several minutes, I went to check on Sophie, needing to see her peaceful, sleeping face. Her bed was empty. Panic surged through me until I spotted her stuffed rabbit in the hallway outside our bedroom door. Following this clue, I found Sophie sitting on the top stair, hugging her knees. Baby, what are you doing out of bed? I asked, sitting beside her. I heard you and Daddy yelling, she said, her voice small. Is it because of what happened at Grandma's? I put my arm around her shoulders. Grown-ups sometimes disagree about how to handle difficult situations. Why doesn't Grandma like me? The direct question broke my heart. Sometimes people have hurt feelings or wrong ideas in their heads that make them act in ways that hurt others, I explained, trying to find age-appropriate words. It doesn't mean you did anything wrong. Amanda said Grandma thinks I'm not really Daddy's little girl, Sophie whispered. Is that true? The realization that the children had been discussing this behind Sophie's back added another layer of pain. No, sweetheart. You are absolutely Daddy's little girl. You have his smile, his dimple, even his talent for art. Then why does Grandma tell people I'm not? What? When did Grandma say that to you? I asked, alarmed. Sophie traced patterns on her pajama pants. She told Aunt Jennifer that I don't have our family eyes. And when I was drawing at her house last month, she said I must get my artistic talent from the other side because nobody in Daddy's family draws like that. Fury rose in me at the thought of Virginia making these comments directly to my 7-year-old child. This wasn't just ignoring Sophie, it was actively undermining her sense of belonging and identity. Listen to me very carefully, I said, turning Sophie to face me. You are Robert and Natalie Matthews' daughter. You belong in this family. Nothing your grandmother or anyone else says can change that. I carried Sophie back to bed, lying beside her until she fell asleep again. Then I returned to our bedroom, drafting a text to Robert that simply read, "We need to talk about what Sophie just told me. Your mother has been making comments to her directly about not being your biological child." When morning came, Robert was already in the kitchen making coffee. His eyes were bloodshot from a sleepless night on our uncomfortable couch. Did you get my text? I asked. He nodded. What exactly did Sophie say? I repeated Sophie's revelations about Virginia's direct comments undermining her identity as his daughter. That's emotional abuse, Robert. Your mother is emotionally abusing our 7-year-old daughter. The defensive wall he'd maintained finally began to crumble. She actually said those things to Sophie, not just to other adults. Yes, and who knows what else she said that Sophie hasn't told us. Robert set down his coffee cup with a shaking hand. I'll call Mom today. He made the call from his home office while I prepared breakfast. When he emerged 30 minutes later, his expression was grim. She denied everything, claimed Sophie misunderstood or is making things up for attention. Then she had the audacity to suggest we should have Sophie evaluated by a child psychologist for lying. What did you say to that? I asked, bracing myself for his answer. I told her that if anyone needed evaluation, it was her. And that until she acknowledges Sophie as her granddaughter and apologizes for her treatment, we would be reconsidering our relationship. His voice was strained, but determined. I reached for his hand across the kitchen island. Thank you for standing up for our daughter. I should have done it years ago, he admitted. I was hoping she'd come around on her own. Later that afternoon, I found Sophie in her room, working intently on something at her small desk. Scraps of colorful paper surrounded her, along with glue sticks and markers. What are you making, sweetheart? I asked. She quickly covered her project with both hands. It's a secret. A good secret or a bad secret? A good one. It's for Grandma. Despite everything, her loyalty amazed me. That's very kind after. Yesterday, I said carefully. Sophie moved her hands, revealing a handmade box decorated with intricate patterns and photos. It's not just for me. Daddy helped me start it last year. He said if Grandma ever made me feel bad again, I should give her this box. I stared at the box, confused about what Robert had planned. What's inside? I don't know. Daddy put some papers in it and sealed this part. She pointed to an inner compartment. He said only Grandma should open it. That evening, after Sophie went to bed, I confronted Robert about the mysterious box. What exactly did you give our daughter to give to your mother? Robert looked uncomfortable. After last year's birthday incident, I prepared some evidence. Just in case Mom ever crossed the line again. What kind of evidence? Documents that prove without question that Sophie is my biological daughter. I was hoping I'd never need to use them, that Mom would accept her without proof. But I wanted to be prepared. And you told our daughter to deliver this proof herself? Put her in the middle of this adult situation. I know it sounds bad when you put it that way, he admitted. But I thought coming from Sophie it might, I don't know, have more impact. Make Mom see how her behavior is affecting a child. I shook my head, torn between appreciation that he'd prepared something and concern about his method. So what now? Virginia has invited everyone for a New Year's gathering. Do we go? Cut ties completely. Robert ran his hands through his hair. I think we should go. Give Mom one last chance to make this right. If she can't accept Sophie after seeing the proof, then we'll have to limit contact. And put Sophie through more potential hurt? I'm not sure that's worth it. I promise I'll protect her this time, Robert said with determination I'd rarely seen from him regarding his mother. No more keeping the peace at Sophie's expense. Sophie, overhearing part of our conversation from the hallway, came into the room clutching her special box. I want to go to Grandma's. I want to give her my present. Looking at her hopeful face, I reluctantly agreed. Okay, but at the first sign of your grandmother being unkind, we're leaving. Sophie nodded solemnly. I'll pack my box in my backpack so it doesn't get squished. Virginia's New Year's gathering was smaller than Christmas, limited to immediate family rather than extended relatives. Her home was still decorated lavishly, though Christmas ornaments had been replaced with silver and gold New Year's themed decor. She greeted us at the door with cool civility. Robert, Natalie, Sophie. So glad you could make it. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Robert's cousins and their families arrived shortly after us, creating a buffer of conversation and activity. I noticed the other adults watching our interactions with Virginia carefully, clearly aware of the Christmas incident. Elizabeth approached me while the children played. I want you to know that what happened at Christmas wasn't right, she said quietly. Virginia had no business treating Sophie that way. I've spoken to her about it. Thank you, I said, surprised and touched by her support. It means a lot to know others noticed. We've all noticed over the years, she admitted. We just didn't want to interfere in family matters. That was wrong of us. The evening progressed with Virginia maintaining physical and emotional distance from Sophie. She spoke to her only when absolutely necessary, addressing her as Sophie rather than sweetheart or darling as she did with the other children. Dinner was a tense affair, with meaningful glances exchanged between family members whenever Virginia made a pointed comment or deliberately engaged with every child except Sophie. Robert, true to his word, attempted to redirect conversations and include Sophie whenever possible. After dessert, Virginia stood and clapped her hands for attention. I have a few small tokens I forgot to distribute at Christmas, she announced, retrieving several gift bags from a side table. She called each child's name, presenting them with additional gifts, books, games, and candy. Once again, she completely skipped Sophie. The room fell silent, the tension palpable. I reached for Sophie's hand under the table, preparing to leave as promised. Robert cleared his throat, finally ready to speak up, but before he could say anything, Sophie stood. Without a word, she walked to her backpack near the door and retrieved her carefully decorated box. She returned to the table, her small face solemn but determined. With both hands, she slid the box across the table toward Virginia. "Grandma, Dad told me to give this to you if you ever ignored me again," she said clearly, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. Virginia stared at the box in confusion, then at Robert, who nodded grimly. "What is this?" she asked. "Open it," Robert said. "Please." With reluctant fingers, Virginia lifted the lid of Sophie's handmade box. Inside, neatly arranged, were several documents and photographs. A DNA test from Robert's childhood, taken during a medical procedure. A DNA test for Sophie, dated from the previous year. Hospital birth records showing Robert listed as the father. A scientific comparison highlighting identical genetic markers between father and daughter. Robert's baby photo placed next to Sophie's at the same age, showing striking resemblance. And finally, a handwritten note from Robert. "She is my daughter. Your granddaughter. Your choice now." Virginia's face strained of color as she examined each piece of evidence. Her hands trembled slightly as she compared the photographs. The silence stretched uncomfortably until Robert finally spoke, his voice low but firm. "Mom, I've let this go on too long. Sophie is my daughter, your granddaughter. Your treatment of her ends today." Virginia's mouth opened and closed several times before she found her voice. There must be some mistake. Clarissa's mother told me." "Clarissa's mother lied," Robert interrupted. "Probably out of spite, after I broke the engagement. But regardless of where this idea came from, you chose to believe the worst about Natalie and reject an innocent child without even asking me directly." "I did ask you," Virginia protested weakly. "Years ago. You seemed defensive. And instead of accepting my word, you continued believing gossip. You've hurt my daughter repeatedly, made her feel unwelcome in her own family." The other adults watched in uncomfortable silence. Then Amanda, the 11-year-old, slid out of her chair and walked to Sophie. She removed the new bracelet Virginia had just given her and placed it around Sophie's wrist. "We're definitely cousins," she declared loudly. "We have the same eyes." That simple act of childhood solidarity broke the tension. Alexander followed his sister's lead, offering Sophie one of his Christmas chocolates. Soon all the children had gathered around Sophie, inadvertently demonstrating what acceptance should look like. Virginia stood abruptly. "Excuse me," she murmured, leaving the room with uncharacteristic awkwardness. Elizabeth caught my eye and nodded approvingly. Jennifer squeezed Robert's shoulder as she passed him, a silent acknowledgement of his long-overdue stand. For the first time since I'd known this family, power had shifted. Virginia's authority had been publicly challenged, and she had been found wanting. Sophie, surrounded by her cousins, looked confused but pleased by their sudden attention. "Can we go play now?" she asked, and the children ran off together, the adults' drama already forgotten in their minds. Robert exhaled slowly. "I should check on Mom." I nodded, though part of me wanted to tell him to let her sit with her humiliation a while longer. He had earned the right to decide how to proceed with his mother. The other adults gathered around me after Robert left. "We should have said something sooner," William admitted. "We all noticed how Virginia treated Sophie differently. She told us Sophie was, well, it doesn't matter what she said," Jennifer added. "We shouldn't have accepted her explanation without question." "Family dynamics are complicated," I acknowledged. "But thank you for supporting Sophie now. That's what matters." When Virginia returned to the room 30 minutes later, her eyes were red-rimmed, but her posture was rigid as ever. She was nothing if not composed in public. "Coffee will be served in the living room," she announced, as if nothing had happened. Robert followed behind her, his expression suggesting their private conversation had not gone well. He gave me a slight headshake when I raised an eyebrow in question. The remainder of the evening passed in strained politeness. Virginia avoided direct interaction with Sophie, but she no longer actively excluded her. It was a cold truce rather than true acceptance. As we prepared to leave, Virginia handed Sophie a generic gift bag. "I found this in my closet. Happy New Year." Inside was a store-bought art set, clearly a last-minute gesture without personal thought. Nevertheless, Sophie beamed. "Thank you, Grandma. I love drawing." In the car, Sophie chattered excitedly about playing with her cousins, seemingly unaffected by the adult drama. "Amanda says I can come to her birthday party next month. And Alexander showed me his cool science kit. Can I get one too?" Robert and I exchanged glances in the front seat, relieved that Sophie had found connection with her cousins despite Virginia's behavior. "So," I said after Sophie had fallen asleep in the back seat, "how did your conversation with your mother go?" Robert sighed heavily. "About as well as you'd expect. She's humiliated but not genuinely remorseful. She said she needs time to process everything." Translation: she's angry her authority was challenged publicly, but doesn't want to admit she was wrong. Pretty much. But something changed tonight, Natalie. The family saw what's been happening. Mom can't maintain her narrative anymore. When we arrived home, Robert carried sleeping Sophie to her bed. Afterward, he joined me in the kitchen where I was making tea. "I want to apologize," he said, leaning against the counter. "Not just for tonight or Christmas, but for years of enabling my mother's behavior. I convinced myself I was maintaining family peace, but really, I was just avoiding conflict at Sophie's expense." "Why did you prepare that box of evidence but never use it?" I asked. "Honestly, I hoped I'd never need to. I wanted Mom to love Sophie for who she is, not because a DNA test proved she's really family. But I also knew Mom might never let go of her suspicions without concrete proof. And you had Sophie deliver it rather than confronting your mother yourself." Robert looked ashamed. "I know that was cowardly. I put our daughter in the middle of an adult conflict. I agreed. But Sophie handled it with more dignity than most adults would have. And seeing her stand up for herself seemed to impact everyone more than if you or I had done it." In the weeks that followed, we established new boundaries with Virginia. She could see Sophie only during family gatherings or supervised visits until she demonstrated genuine change. Robert insisted on family therapy, though Virginia initially refused. "Therapy is for people with real problems," she declared. "Not for family misunderstandings." "This wasn't a misunderstanding, Mom," Robert had replied firmly. "It was years of rejection and emotional abuse of my daughter. Either you agree to therapy, or we'll be seeing a lot less of you." Faced with the potential loss of her son and the family's changed perception of her, Virginia reluctantly agreed to 3 sessions. The first therapy appointment was predictably difficult. Virginia attempted to rewrite history, painting herself as the concerned grandmother who only wanted to protect her son. The therapist, Dr. Bennett, gently but persistently redirected her. "It seems you had concerns about Sophie's paternity," Dr. Bennett observed. "But instead of addressing them directly with your son and daughter-in-law, you chose to believe outsiders and act on those beliefs for 7 years. Can you help us understand that choice?" Virginia struggled to justify her behavior without admitting fault. "In our family, we don't discuss unpleasant matters directly. It's not proper. Yet you discussed your suspicions with extended family members and even made comments to Sophie herself," Dr. Bennett noted. "Those actions caused significant harm." By the 3rd session, Virginia had progressed to acknowledging her behavior was perhaps inappropriate, though she still blamed others for misinterpreting her intentions. Meanwhile, Sophie continued therapy with a child psychologist who specialized in family dynamics. Through art therapy, she expressed her confusion and hurt over her grandmother's treatment. "Sophie is remarkably resilient," her therapist told us. "But she's internalized some concerning beliefs about her worthiness of love. We're working on rebuilding her confidence." Robert and I also attended couples counseling to address the strain on our marriage. His years of choosing his mother over our family had created resentments that wouldn't disappear overnight. I feel like I can't trust you to have my back, I admitted during one session. Every time your mother created problems, you found excuses for her behavior. And I feel guilty for not protecting Sophie, Robert responded, but also torn between my roles as a son and a father. I was raised to believe family loyalty means never confronting problems directly. That's not loyalty, our therapist pointed out. That's avoidance. True loyalty sometimes requires difficult conversations to protect those we love. 3 months after the New Year's confrontation, Virginia asked to speak with us privately after a family dinner at Elizabeth's home. Sophie was playing with her cousins upstairs, happily integrated into the cousin group now that the adults had made it clear she was fully accepted. I've been doing some thinking, Virginia began stiffly, and some reading that Dr. Bennett suggested. Robert and I waited silently. I realize now that my concerns about Sophie's paternity were unfounded. The evidence you provided was quite conclusive. She paused, clearly struggling. My behavior towards Sophie was inappropriate. I apologize. The words seemed rehearsed and lacked genuine emotion, but it was more acknowledgement than I'd expected. Thank you for that, Mom, Robert said carefully. But Sophie is the one who deserves your apology more than we do. Virginia nodded. I'll speak with her before you leave today. Her conversation with Sophie was brief and awkward, but it represented progress. She presented Sophie with a proper gift, a high-quality art set selected with actual thought, and told her she was sorry for any confusion about family relationships. Sophie, with the beautiful forgiveness of childhood, accepted both the gift and the apology without reservation. That's okay, Grandma. Sometimes grown-ups get confused too. On the drive home, Sophie asked thoughtfully, "Is Grandma going to be nice to me now?" "She's going to try," I answered honestly. Sometimes people need time to change their behavior, even when they know they should. Like when I had to practice not interrupting at school, Sophie reasoned. Ms. Wilson said new habits take time. I smiled at her simple wisdom. Exactly like that. 18 months later, we gathered at our home to celebrate Sophie's 9th birthday. The backyard was decorated with streamers and balloons, with a table of presents and a cake shaped like an artist's palette, a nod to Sophie's growing talent. Virginia arrived precisely on time, carrying a carefully wrapped gift. Her relationship with Sophie had evolved slowly over the past year and a half. While never the warm, doting grandmother I'd hoped for, she had learned to treat Sophie with basic respect and inclusion. "Happy birthday, Sophie," she said, handing over her gift. "I thought you might enjoy this for your collection." Sophie unwrapped a professional-grade sketchbook and set of drawing pencils, a thoughtful gift that acknowledged her interests. "Thank you, Grandma. These are just what I wanted." The party progressed with the happy chaos of children playing and adults conversing. Robert stood beside me, his arm around my waist, as we watched Sophie organizing a game for her friends and cousins. "She's thriving," he observed. Despite everything, our marriage had weathered its own storms during this period. The confrontation with Virginia had forced Robert to examine patterns in our relationship where he'd prioritized keeping the peace over addressing real issues. Through counseling, we'd learned to communicate more directly, with Robert working consciously to break generational patterns of conflict avoidance. Virginia had made her own journey, albeit a limited one. While I doubted she'd ever fully acknowledge the depth of her wrongdoing, she had accepted the new family dynamic. The DNA proof had forced her to abandon her paternity conspiracy, and the united front from Robert's cousins had shown her that her influence depended on treating all family members with respect. Family therapy had continued sporadically, with decreasing frequency as relationships stabilized. During our last session, Dr. Bennett had observed, "This family has made remarkable progress in establishing healthy boundaries and communication patterns." Sophie's resilience amazed me daily. The child psychologist had helped her process her grandmother's rejection without internalizing it as a reflection of her worth. Some people have a harder time loving others, Sophie had explained to a friend who asked why her grandmother seemed different from other grandparents. But that's about them, not about me. After the birthday guests departed, our immediate family, including Virginia, remained for a quiet dinner. Sophie proudly showed her grandmother her latest art project, a landscape painting she created in her weekend art class. "You have genuine talent," Virginia acknowledged, studying the painting with genuine interest. "Perhaps we should look into more advanced classes." Later, as Robert walked his mother to her car, I overheard a rare moment of vulnerability from Virginia. "I nearly lost all of you because of my stubbornness," she admitted quietly. "I'm trying to do better, Robert." "I know, Mom. We see that." That night, after Sophie was asleep, Robert and I sat on our back porch, reflecting on the journey of the past year and a half. "I never realized how much courage it takes to break unhealthy family patterns," Robert said. "Standing up to my mother was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but also the most necessary. The easy path is rarely the right one when it comes to protecting our children," I agreed. "Sometimes love means making difficult choices and having uncomfortable conversations." We learned that family isn't defined by DNA or tradition alone, but by consistent choices to protect, support, and cherish each other. Virginia had biological connections to Sophie, but had failed to act as family until forced to confront her behavior. Meanwhile, Elizabeth and the other cousins had chosen to embrace Sophie despite having no blood relationship. "I think the greatest gift we've given Sophie through all this is showing her she deserves to be treated with respect," I said. "That she doesn't have to accept mistreatment to be part of a family. And that sometimes standing up for yourself changes not just how others treat you, but how you see yourself," Robert added. Our journey wasn't finished. Virginia still occasionally made thoughtless comments, and Robert sometimes slipped back into conflict avoidance patterns. But we'd learned to address issues directly rather than allowing resentment to fester. Sophie had shown wisdom beyond her years throughout the process. "Sometimes the strongest people are the ones who have been hurt but keep being kind anyway," she'd written in a school essay about family. Her teacher had been so moved she'd sent it home with a special note. "The path to healing isn't linear. Some days were harder than others, with old wounds reopened by careless words or actions. But we were moving forward together, eyes open to both the challenges and the possibilities." If you've ever faced toxic family dynamics or had to protect your child from emotional harm, I hope our story gives you courage. Standing up against family toxicity isn't about vengeance or punishment. It's about creating safe spaces where genuine love can flourish. Sometimes the most powerful words you can say are, "This stops now." Have you ever had to establish boundaries with family members for your child's sake? How did you handle it? Share your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe for more real-life stories about family dynamics and personal growth. Like and share if you know someone who might need to hear this message of hope and healing. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, protecting those we love is never wrong, even when it's difficult. I'm Savannah Mitchell, 29, an architect living in Boston. Yesterday, I called my Aunt Patricia about my brother Mason's wedding, supposedly happening today in Atlanta. "I can't wait for the ceremony tomorrow," I gushed, genuinely excited despite our complicated relationship. There was an awkward pause before she responded. "Savannah, it was last week." My stomach dropped as my vision blurred. She continued talking, but her words became distant echoes as reality crashed around me. Before I share how my entire family could exclude me from this milestone, let me know where you're watching from in the comments and hit that subscribe button if family betrayal stories resonate with you. Growing up in suburban Atlanta, the differences between my brother Mason and me were apparent from elementary school. While I gravitated toward books, art, and solitary creative pursuits, Mason embodied the all-American athletic ideal with his natural charisma and football talents. My parents, Robert and Linda Mitchell, never tried to hide their preference for his accomplishments over mine. When I won the state science competition in 8th grade, They nodded politely before rushing off to Mason's football game. When I earned a full scholarship to Cornell for architecture, my father merely commented that it was nice before launching into a 20-minute discussion about Mason's fraternity antics at Georgia Tech. The family dynamic wasn't subtle. Mason was the golden child whose achievements were celebrated with dinner parties and social media announcements, while mine warranted brief acknowledgments at best. Our family photos told the story clearly. Mason front and center beside our beaming parents, while I often stood slightly apart, my smile a bit too forced. Despite this imbalance, I maintained hope that adulthood would equalize our standing in the family. After graduating with honors, I accepted a position at a prestigious Boston architectural firm, believing distance might help reset our relationship dynamics. The geographic separation gave me perspective on patterns I'd normalized, how family gatherings revolved around Mason's schedule, never mine, how my parents called him daily but reached out to me only when they needed something, usually money or professional advice, since my career had flourished. My childhood friend Zoe, who remained in Atlanta, saw the pattern clearly. "They treat you like an ATM with a blueprint service," she once remarked after I mentioned sending money for my parents' anniversary party, an event I wasn't actually invited to attend because it just came together last minute. I dismissed her concerns, attributing the oversight to innocent forgetfulness rather than systematic exclusion. The irony didn't escape me that despite being the less favored child, I had become the financial safety net for the family. My Boston-based position at Montgomery Designs had accelerated my career beyond my peers, allowing me to accumulate savings that my brother's more modest insurance sales job couldn't match. When my parents mentioned wanting to renovate their aging colonial home last Christmas, I immediately offered to contribute substantially and provide design expertise for free. They accepted with an enthusiasm I rarely saw directed at me, and for once, I felt genuinely valued. Mason's engagement to Amber Wilson 6 months ago rekindled my hope for family reconnection. When he called to share the news, he actually asked me to help plan aspects of the wedding given my eye for design, the first time he'd ever acknowledged my professional abilities. I threw myself into helping select the venue, a historic garden estate outside Atlanta, and consulted on decorations, even creating digital mock-ups of the space. We had several video calls where Mason and Amber seemed genuinely appreciative, with Amber commenting that my ideas saved the wedding. I committed to flying from Boston to Atlanta for the June 15th ceremony, blocking time off work months in advance and purchasing a non-refundable first-class ticket as a treat to myself. The wedding represented more than my brother's marriage. It symbolized my reintegration into the family fold, a chance to heal old wounds and establish a more balanced adult relationship with my parents and brother. Looking back, I should have recognized the warning signs. My mother forgot to include me in the bridal shower invitation list. The rehearsal dinner details were never shared despite my repeated requests. My suggestions for the ceremony gradually disappeared from the plans without explanation. But each time, I rationalized their behavior, determined to break the cycle of exclusion through persistent goodwill. The Mitchell family had a long history of forgetting to include me, childhood birthday parties where invitations went out late, forcing me to scramble for friends, high school graduation where they failed to reserve enough seats for my academic mentors, even my architecture license celebration where they promised to visit but canceled last minute for Mason's flag football tournament. Each incident in isolation seemed like an unfortunate oversight, but Zoe had been pointing out the pattern for years. "They don't forget things for Mason," she observed after my parents missed my virtual awards ceremony, but managed to attend his fantasy football draft in person the same weekend. Still, family loyalty ran deep, and I continued making excuses for their behavior while seeking their approval through achievement and generosity. The revelation about the wedding blindsided me completely. I was sitting in my Boston apartment that Thursday evening, suitcase half-packed on my bed, when I decided to call Aunt Patricia to confirm what time she'd pick me up from the Atlanta airport the next day. Patricia had always been marginally kinder to me than my parents, occasionally acknowledging my accomplishments with small gifts or cards. When she answered, her voice carried the overly bright tone people use when uncomfortable. After exchanging pleasantries, I mentioned my excitement about tomorrow's ceremony. The silence that followed stretched painfully before she responded with those devastating words. "Savannah, it was last week." Initially, I thought I had misheard her. "What do you mean?" "Mason's wedding is tomorrow, June 15th. Patricia sighed, then explained in a hesitant voice that the wedding had occurred the previous Saturday, June 8th. According to her, the date had changed months ago due to venue availability issues. My hands began to tremble so badly, I nearly dropped my phone. "That's impossible," I insisted, my voice barely audible. "I've been helping plan everything for June 15th. I have the emails, the calendar invites." Patricia interrupted gently. "Honey, I'm looking at the wedding photos right now. Would you like me to send some?" Without waiting for my response, my phone buzzed with an incoming video call request. I accepted it with numb fingers to find Patricia's face looking concerned before she flipped the camera to show her laptop screen displaying a professional photo album. There they were, unmistakable images of Mason in a classic black tuxedo standing beside Amber in a stunning white gown with the cathedral veil I had helped her select. My parents flanked the couple, my mother in the periwinkle blue dress she described to me, my father sporting the new gray suit he'd mentioned purchasing. The background featured the exact floral arrangements I had suggested, white roses and blue hydrangeas cascading from garden trellises. Every detail I had consulted on was perfectly executed, except I was nowhere to be seen in any image. Patricia scrolled through dozens of photos, the ceremony under the oak arbor, the reception in the glass conservatory, the dance floor where my father twirled a laughing Amber. Photos captured Aunt Patricia herself, Uncle James, my cousins Alexis and Taylor, even distant relatives from California I hadn't seen in years. Everyone was present except me. My voice cracked. They told me it was tomorrow. I have my ticket, my hotel confirmation. Patricia made a sympathetic noise but continued scrolling, stopping at a group photo showing literally every member of the extended Mitchell family posed on the grand staircase of the venue. An entire family united, minus one daughter. My stomach clenched as I recognized faces of relatives who had responded to my texts about seeing them at the wedding just days earlier. My cousin Taylor had asked about my flight details on Tuesday. Uncle James had mentioned looking forward to catching up on Wednesday. None of them had indicated anything was amiss or that the event had already occurred. Did they say why I wasn't there? I managed to ask, my throat constricting around each word. Patricia hesitated before responding. "Your mother told everyone you couldn't make it because of a big project deadline. Some people asked about you, but..." She trailed off awkwardly. A project deadline. The convenient excuse manufactured to explain my absence to confused relatives. The calculated lie that would prevent anyone from questioning further or reaching out to me directly. The professional photos revealed other disturbing details. Personalized table settings with calligraphed name cards for every family member except me. The memory table displaying family photographs where I had been systematically excluded. And most painfully, the wedding program listing the beloved family members in attendance, my name conspicuously absent. As Patricia continued flipping through images, I noticed the wedding hashtag in the corner of one photo. Hashtag Mason and Amber June 8. Pulling up Instagram with trembling fingers, I searched the tag to find hundreds of posts from a week ago. Guests celebrating, dancing, sharing candid moments from my brother's wedding. Posts I had never seen because everyone had carefully avoided tagging me. My cousin Alexis, who had texted me about borrowing shoes for the wedding just yesterday, had posted 15 photos with captions about the perfect family celebration. Family friends I'd known since childhood had shared stories about the intimate family gathering, while presumably knowing I had been excluded. The physical evidence was overwhelming, but my mind struggled to process the magnitude of the deception. This wasn't a miscommunication or an oversight. It required coordinated, deliberate action by dozens of people over an extended period. "Patricia," I interrupted her ongoing commentary about the flower arrangements. "Did everyone know the date had changed except me?" My aunt paused, confusion crossing her features. "Well, I thought you knew but couldn't make it. The new invitations went out months ago." New invitations. Invitations I had never received. "Can I see the invitation?" I asked. Patricia fumbled in her desk drawer before holding up an elegant cream-colored card with gold foil lettering. The date clearly read Saturday, June 8th, not the June 15th that had been in every communication I received. My parents and brother had maintained the charade of the later date exclusively with me while informing everyone else of the change. The realization hit me with physical force. This was not an error or miscommunication. This was intentional, coordinated exclusion executed with frightening precision. I thanked Patricia weakly before disconnecting, then sat motionless in my half-packed apartment, surrounded by the unworn bridesmaid dress I'd purchased, the wrapped wedding gift, and printed directions to a ceremony that had already happened without me. After ending the call with Patricia, I sat frozen for nearly an hour before summoning the courage to call my parents. My hands shook so badly, I had to redial twice. When my mother answered with a casual, "Hello, sweetie," as if nothing were amiss, something fractured inside me. "Mom," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady, "I just spoke with Aunt Patricia. The wedding was last week." A pause then. "Oh, goodness, didn't we tell you?" The date changed last minute because of a scheduling conflict with the venue. Her tone carried the slight impatience she typically used when explaining something obvious. "Last minute," I repeated incredulously. "Patricia said new invitations went out months ago. I never received one." My mother sighed dramatically. "We definitely told you, Savannah. Remember when we called in March about the venue issue? I'm certain we mentioned it then." That call had indeed happened, but the date change was never discussed. I had meticulous notes from every wedding-related conversation, a professional habit that now served as evidence of their deception. "Mom, I have our text messages from literally yesterday where you mentioned looking forward to seeing me at the wedding this weekend. Why would you say that if it already happened?" Another pause. "Well, you must have misunderstood. Your father, tell Savannah about the date change we discussed." My father's voice came on the line, gruff and dismissive. "We definitely told you it moved to the 8th. Maybe you weren't paying attention, as usual." The familiar accusation that my focus was somehow deficient when it came to family matters stung with practiced precision. "Dad, I took time off work for the 15th. I have a plane ticket for tomorrow. I've been texting everyone about the wedding this week, and no one, not one person, mentioned it already happened." My father's response chilled me. "Don't make this about you, Savannah. It was Mason's special day, and he was disappointed you chose not to come." The audacity of this statement momentarily robbed me of speech. They were not only denying their deception but actively recasting me as the villain who had deliberately skipped the wedding. When I finally collected myself, I asked to speak to Mason. Minutes later, my brother's voice came through, artificially bright. "Hey, Save, what's up?" As if we were having a normal conversation. As if he hadn't just gotten married without his only sister present. "Mason," I said quietly, "why wasn't I at your wedding?" His laugh sounded forced. "What are you talking about? We told you the date changed to the 8th. Everyone knew." The coordinated nature of their lies became increasingly apparent as I pressed for details. When asked exactly when they had informed me, each family member gave different answers. Mom insisted it was during a March phone call. Dad claimed they had sent an email in April. Mason swore he had texted me the new date in May. When I pointed out the contradictions in their stories, they smoothly shifted tactics. Perhaps they had collectively forgotten to tell me, but surely that was an understandable oversight amid wedding stress. The conversation took an even more disturbing turn when I asked about the dozens of interactions we'd had in the past week, all centered around a wedding supposedly happening on June 15th. "You probably just got confused," my mother suggested sympathetically. "You've always mixed up dates. Remember that time in high school when you missed Grandma's birthday?" This reference to a minor scheduling error from 15 years ago exemplified their strategy, excavating ancient history to establish a pattern that didn't exist. When I mentioned the non-refundable plane ticket and hotel reservation, my father snorted dismissively. "Always so concerned about money. It's just a couple $100, Savannah." The ticket had cost over $800 and the hotel another $400. Significant sums they casually dismissed while knowing I had incurred these expenses for an event they ensured I would miss. My growing anger must have been evident because Mason suddenly adopted a conciliatory tone. "Look, we're really sorry if there was a miscommunication. We'll make it up to you. You can come visit next month, and we'll have a special dinner." The offer was insulting, equating a special dinner with their daughter and sister's exclusion from a once-in-a-lifetime family event. I hung up and immediately called my cousin Taylor, hoping for a different perspective. Instead, Taylor uncomfortably confirmed that everyone had received new invitations months ago and had been told I couldn't make it due to work commitments. When I pressed about our text exchange just days ago discussing the upcoming wedding, Taylor became flustered. "I thought we were just talking generally about the wedding. I didn't realize you didn't know." One by one, I contacted relatives and family friends who all told variations of the same story. They had been explicitly informed by my parents or Mason that I was unable to attend due to pressing work obligations. Some expressed having found it odd that I would miss my only brother's wedding but hadn't felt it was their place to question my supposed decision. My colleague Diane called during this painful investigation, concerned when I didn't show up for our morning meeting. Through tears, I explained the situation. Unlike my family, her outrage was immediate and validating. "Savannah, that's not a misunderstanding. That's calculated emotional abuse." Her words crystallized what I had been struggling to name. This wasn't a mishap or oversight. It was a deliberate, coordinated effort to exclude me from a significant family milestone while maintaining plausible deniability. In a desperate attempt to find evidence of the notification my family insisted had occurred, I scoured my email archives, text messages, voicemails, and even postal mail. Nothing. No invitation with the updated date, no email mentioning the change, no text from Mason with the new information, nothing but continued references to the June 15th date I had been planning around for months. The final piece of evidence came from an unlikely source, Amber's sister Jessie, whom I had met only twice during video planning calls. She responded to my carefully worded inquiry with shocking candor. "I always thought it was weird they changed the date, but didn't tell you. Amber and I had a huge fight about it. I told her it was messed up to exclude you, but Mason convinced her you'd understand since you're not really close anyway." Not really close. The phrase echoed painfully. I had spent months helping plan their wedding, contributed ideas they had implemented, and offered genuine support despite years of feeling secondary in my family. The deliberate nature of the exclusion was now undeniable, confirmed by an outsider who had witnessed the decision-making process. I sat in my apartment surrounded by wedding preparations that would never be used, confronting the devastating reality that my family had not only excluded me from a significant event, but had orchestrated an elaborate deception to ensure I wouldn't discover the truth until it was too late. The realization was physically nauseating. I barely made it to the bathroom before emptying the contents of my stomach. Curled on the cold tile floor afterward, I finally allowed myself to acknowledge what had been true all along. The people who should have loved me most had methodically, intentionally hurt me in a way that could never be accidentally explained away. The week following my discovery passed in a blur of grief and revelation. I called in sick to work, something I'd never done without legitimate illness, and spent days alternating between crushing despair and clarifying anger. My apartment became both sanctuary and prison as I avoided human contact beyond necessary conversations with my boss and brief updates to Zoe, who offered to fly to Boston immediately. I declined her offer but accepted her virtual support through daily video calls where she listened without judgment as I processed the magnitude of the betrayal. Sleep eluded me completely for the first 72 hours, my mind endlessly replaying incidents throughout my life that suddenly appeared in a new, disturbing light. The forgotten birthday party invitations in third grade that arrived the day after the celebration. The college graduation dinner reservation mysteriously changed without my knowledge, resulting in my arrival at an empty restaurant while my family dined across town. The Christmas when everyone received personalized gifts while I received a generic gift card with the wrong name written on the envelope. Each incident I had previously attributed to carelessness now revealed itself as a deliberate pattern of exclusion. On the fourth day, I forced myself to shower, change clothes, and begin a methodical investigation of my family communications. With the cold precision I typically applied to architectural projects, I created a timeline of every interaction regarding Mason's wedding, cataloging emails, texts, and phone calls with timestamps and content notes. The evidence was damning. Consistent references to the June 15th date in every communication with me, contrasted with social media posts from family members clearly showing awareness of the June 8th date weeks in advance. No notification of the change had ever been sent to me through any medium. I found an email from 3 months prior where I had specifically referenced looking forward to the June 15th ceremony, which had received replies from both my mother and Mason without any correction of the date. Text messages from my father just days before the actual wedding discussed what he planned to wear next weekend. Not one family member had slipped or revealed the truth, demonstrating a coordinated effort that must have required constant vigilance and communication among them. Even more disturbing was the discovery of a group chat excluding only me, where relatives had discussed wedding logistics explicitly mentioning the June 8th date. My cousin Alexis had accidentally sent me a screenshot meant for this group months ago, which I had archived without much thought at the time. Reviewing it now revealed a message from my mother reminding everyone not to mention the date change to Savannah. The premeditation was staggering. On day 5, I finally contacted my therapist, Dr. Winters, for an emergency session. I had begun therapy 6 months earlier for what I had vaguely described as family issues, but had never delved into the specifics, still protecting my family's image. Now I shared everything: the wedding exclusion, the gaslighting aftermath, and the mounting evidence of lifelong emotional neglect. Dr. Winters listened attentively before naming what I had experienced. Savannah, what are describing is a textbook case of family scapegoating and emotional abuse. The level of coordination required to maintain this deception indicates this isn't impulsive behavior, but a deeply ingrained dynamic. Her validation cracked something open inside me. We spent 2 hours dissecting patterns I had normalized since childhood, how I had been assigned the role of family scapegoat, consistently blamed for conflicts I didn't create, expected to give financially and emotionally without reciprocation, and systematically excluded from positive family experiences while being required to support everyone else's milestones. Dr. Winters explained how common it was for scapegoated children to become high achievers, unconsciously trying to earn the love withheld from them, while simultaneously being punished for those very achievements if they overshadowed the designated golden child. My academic and professional success had become both my defense mechanism and the target for my family's resentment. The wedding exclusion, she explained gently, represents an escalation of existing patterns, likely triggered by your increasing independence and success. By maintaining the fiction of the wrong date, they ensured you would miss the event without having to explicitly uninvite you, allowing them to maintain their self-image as loving family members while telling others you chose not to attend. That night, I cried for hours, not just for the wedding I had missed, but for the loving family I had never actually had. The grief felt bottomless, mourning both the specific loss and the lifelong absence of unconditional love I had continuously tried to earn. By the second week, grief began transforming into clarity. I remembered contributing $15,000 toward wedding expenses, money Mason and my parents had eagerly accepted despite planning my exclusion. I found emails where I had offered design consultations for the venue, detailed suggestions Mason and Amber had incorporated without credit, and evidence of my genuine emotional investment in an event I would never witness. The financial exploitation added another dimension to the betrayal. My friend Zoe finally said what I had been avoiding. They used you for your money and expertise, then discarded you when it came time to celebrate. The harsh assessment resonated with undeniable truth. I began reviewing other financial contributions I had made to family causes over the years, helping fund my parents' anniversary vacation, contributing to Mason's car down payment, regularly sending gifts and money for holidays while receiving token acknowledgments in return. The pattern of financial exploitation paralleled the emotional dynamics. I gave generously, received minimally, and was expected to continue without complaint. 3 weeks after the discovery, I received a text from my mother asking when I planned to get over this misunderstanding because they missed hearing from me. The casual dismissal of my pain became the catalyst for a decision that had been forming subconsciously. After consulting with Dr. Winters, I crafted a calm, direct email to my parents and Mason explaining that I needed space to process their actions and would be taking a break from communication for an undefined period. I didn't blame or accuse. I simply stated facts about the wedding date deception and my need for distance. Their responses arrived predictably. My mother expressed wounded confusion about why I was still dwelling on an honest mistake. My father accused me of being overly sensitive as usual, and Mason sent a single line. "I thought you'd be bigger than this." Not one acknowledged the harm they had caused or offered a genuine apology. Their reactions confirmed Dr. Winter's assessment that acknowledging their behavior would threaten the family narrative they had constructed, where I was perpetually at fault and they were always reasonable. The space from constant contact allowed me to recognize how much energy I had devoted to seeking their approval, managing their emotions, and trying to earn a place in their inner circle, a place that had been systematically denied regardless of my efforts. For the first time, I considered the possibility of defining family on my terms rather than continuing to seek inclusion in a system designed to exclude me. After 4 weeks of limited contact, I had established a fragile new normal. Returning to work provided welcome structure, and weekly sessions with Dr. Winters helped process layers of family dynamics previously invisible to me. I began reconnecting with friends I had neglected while prioritizing family relationships, discovering support networks I hadn't fully appreciated. My boss had been unexpectedly understanding, even offering me a challenging new commercial project that provided healthy distraction. The acute pain had evolved into a dull background ache, present but no longer debilitating. Then came the call that shattered my tentative peace. My phone lit up with my father's name one Tuesday evening as I reviewed design plans. I nearly declined but decided answering might demonstrate my emotional progress. "Savannah," my father began without preamble, "we need to discuss the home renovation financing. The contractor is waiting on the first payment, and your mother wants to start before the fall weather arrives." No greeting, no inquiry about my well-being, no acknowledgement of our recent conflict, just an immediate financial demand. I remained silent, processing the audacity of this approach, which prompted my father to continue with growing impatience. "We've selected the materials you suggested in your initial design, but the contractor needs 30% down to secure the schedule. We were thinking you could transfer the money by Friday." The casual presumption that I would still contribute after their betrayal momentarily stunned me. Before I could respond, my father added, "Your mother wants to know if you can come down next weekend to review the plans in person. She's thinking about changing the kitchen layout." The entire conversation proceeded as if the wedding deception had never occurred, as if I hadn't explicitly requested space, as if our relationship remained unchanged. When I finally found my voice, I asked simply, "Dad, did you call to check how I'm doing after what happened with the wedding?" His dismissive snort carried through the line with perfect clarity. "Savannah, are you still upset about that miscommunication? It was weeks ago. Family doesn't hold grudges." The selective amnesia was breathtaking. My family certainly held grudges about perceived slights from years earlier, but my exclusion from my only brother's wedding apparently didn't warrant remembrance beyond a month. I maintained composure, while explaining I needed to review my finances before committing to the renovation contribution. My father's tone immediately chilled. "We've already scheduled the contractor based on your commitment. Mason helped us pick finishes yesterday since you've been unreachable." The implied criticism was familiar. Regardless of circumstances, I was always positioned as the unreliable, difficult family member. The conversation ended with my promise to think about it and my father's barely concealed irritation. Minutes later, my mother called with a sweeter approach, reminiscing about childhood memories in the house and emphasizing how meaningful the renovation would be for all of us as a family. When gentle manipulation failed to secure an immediate financial commitment, she added with calculated casualness, "Mason and Amber might live with us while their house sells. Wouldn't it be nice to have the renovation finished before they move in?" The strategic mention of Mason, positioning his needs against mine, represented another familiar dynamic. My brother called next, his approach more direct. Look, Mom and Dad already put down a deposit using some of the wedding money, expecting your contribution to cover the rest. They'll lose that deposit if you back out now. The revelation that they had diverted funds I had contributed for the wedding to start the renovation added another layer of financial exploitation. When I pointed this out, Mason scoffed. It's all family money anyway. What's the difference? The difference, of course, was consent and transparency, qualities consistently absent in our family's financial interactions. The calls continued throughout the evening, my mother again with thinly veiled guilt tactics, my father with increasingly direct demands, even Aunt Patricia recruited to check if you're feeling better about everything, while coincidentally mentioning the renovation excitement. Their coordinated pressure campaign mirrored the wedding deception in its organization and single-minded focus. Not one call included a genuine apology or acknowledgement of harm. Instead, each conversation contained subtle reminders of my perpetual family role, the difficult daughter whose feelings created inconvenient obstacles to family plans. The following morning brought emails from my parents with contractor quotes, material selections, and a formal request for $45,000, significantly higher than the $30,000 initially discussed months earlier. The budget increase came without explanation or consultation, simply an expectation of compliance. My mother's message ended with a casually devastating line. We need to move forward with or without your input, sweetie, but it would be so much easier with your help. The implicit threat was clear. My participation was financially desired, but emotionally optional. That evening, Mason called again while I was having dinner with a colleague. I excused myself to take the call, expecting more renovation pressure. Instead, his voice carried unusual tension. Savannah, I need you to stop making things difficult for Mom and Dad. They've been really stressed about your reaction to the wedding situation. The statement perfectly encapsulated our family dynamic. My reaction to their hurtful behavior, rather than the behavior itself, was positioned as the problem requiring resolution. When I remained silent, Mason continued, Look, you've always been sensitive about feeling left out, even when no one was actually excluding you. We all walk on eggshells trying not to trigger your insecurities. The gaslighting attempt was so transparent, it almost seemed desperate. Mason, I responded carefully, you got married without telling me the correct date. That's not an insecurity I imagined. His frustrated sigh conveyed volumes. It was a miscommunication that you're choosing to interpret in the worst possible way. Anyway, that's water under the bridge. The important thing now is the renovation. The swift pivot from dismissing my feelings to refocusing on financial demands crystallized something I had been struggling to accept. In my family's eyes, my primary value was utilitarian rather than relational. This realization brought unexpected clarity. While Mason continued detailing renovation plans, I experienced a profound internal shift, the recognition that no explanation, evidence, or emotional appeal would ever penetrate the family narrative where I was perpetually wrong and they were perpetually justified. The understanding was simultaneously devastating and liberating. When Mason finally paused for breath, I spoke with newfound calmness. I'll need to see a complete budget breakdown and timeline before making any decisions about the renovation. My practical response temporarily satisfied him, though his parting comment, try not to overthink things like you always do, demonstrated how deeply ingrained the dismissal of my perspective remained in our interactions. That night, reviewing years of financial contributions to family causes, I recognized a pattern of emotional taxation, each dollar representing an unconscious attempt to purchase the acceptance consistently withheld from me. The renovation request wasn't just about money. It represented a critical decision point about my future role in the family system. Would I continue financing relationships that provided minimal emotional return, or establish boundaries that honored my worth beyond utility? The question lingered as I drafted budget questions for my parents, professional and detached, while privately scheduling a flight to Atlanta. Some conversations needed to happen in person, with clear eyes and firm boundaries. I spent the week before my Atlanta trip preparing meticulously with Dr. Winters. We role-played potential family responses to boundary setting, developed grounding techniques for managing emotional manipulation, and established clear parameters for the conversation. Remember, she emphasized during our final session, you're not responsible for their reactions to your boundaries. Their discomfort with your limits doesn't make those limits unreasonable. I arrived in Atlanta on a humid Friday afternoon, having informed my parents I was coming to discuss the renovation in person. Their excited response, focusing exclusively on showing me material samples rather than repairing our relationship, confirmed they expected our usual dynamic to continue unchanged. I checked into a hotel rather than staying at their house, a small act of independence that already felt significant. When I pulled into their driveway Saturday morning, my chest tightened with familiar anxiety. The colonial-style house where I'd grown up appeared exactly as it had during my Christmas visit, the chipping white paint and sagging porch steps representing years of deferred maintenance they now expected me to finance. My mother opened the door with an enthusiastic greeting that avoided any mention of recent conflicts. "Savannah." Perfect timing. The contractor just dropped off new tile samples for the master bathroom. No hug, no acknowledgement of my flight, just immediate focus on renovation details. My father emerged from his study with a folder of documents. "We've prepared a complete breakdown of costs like you requested. The bottom line is at the back. We'll need the first installment by Wednesday to lock in the contractor." The business-like approach to what should have been a reconciliation visit perfectly illustrated our dysfunctional dynamic. Mason and Amber arrived 30 minutes later, carrying architectural magazines and chatting about fixtures, as if we were simply continuing a pleasant ongoing project rather than addressing a significant breach of trust. My mother suggested lunch before getting into all the boring budget details, her transparent attempt to delay the potentially difficult conversation I had come to have. Over carefully prepared sandwiches, my favorite type in what appeared to be a calculated touch, the conversation remained superficially pleasant, focusing on neighborhood gossip and Amber's new teaching position. When my father finally steered discussion toward the renovation timeline, I placed my water glass down deliberately and spoke the words I had rehearsed. "Before we discuss financial commitments, I need to address what happened with the wedding." The table fell silent. My mother's smile froze while my father's expression hardened. Mason and Amber exchanged quick glances that confirmed their awareness of the tension. "Savannah," my mother began with forced lightness, "we've moved past that little miscommunication, haven't we?" "No need to dwell on. It wasn't a miscommunication," I interrupted quietly, removing my phone from my pocket. "I've compiled every email, text message, and documented phone call about the wedding from the past 6 months. There was never any notification about a date change. In fact, there are dozens of explicit references to the June 15th date from all of you, continuing right up until the week of the actual ceremony." The evidence-based approach momentarily stunned them. They had expected emotional accusations they could dismiss as overreaction, not documented proof of their deception. My father recovered first, his tone shifting to authoritarian dismissal. "This is ridiculous. We're not going to sit here while you present some kind of legal case against your family." His attempt to reframe my reasonable request for accountability as an attack illustrated the strategy they had always employed, positioning my desire for fair treatment as unreasonable and aggressive. "I'm not presenting a case," I responded calmly. "I'm establishing facts before making a financial decision. You've asked me to contribute $45,000 toward renovating a home where I was made to feel unwelcome throughout my childhood, requested by family members who deliberately excluded me from a significant life event while accepting my financial contribution toward it." The blunt assessment landed like a physical blow. My mother's eyes widened while my father's face flushed with anger. Mason stared at his plate, suddenly fascinated by sandwich crumbs. Amber, witnessing our family dynamics directly for perhaps the first time, looked visibly uncomfortable. "That's completely unfair," my mother finally managed, tears appearing on cue. "We've always loved you. We made one mistake with the wedding date." "It wasn't a mistake," I said, my voice remaining steady. "Jesse confirmed that the date change was deliberately not communicated to me." The group chat I was excluded from contained explicit instructions not to mention the new date to me. This was a coordinated decision, not an oversight. The mention of external confirmation disrupted their unified front. My mother glanced accusingly at Amber, whose sister had apparently broken ranks. My father shifted strategies, moving from denial to minimization. Even if there was some miscommunication, holding a grudge is childish. Family forgives. The familiar guilt tactic slid off me with surprising ease as I continued. I've contributed financially to this family for years. College funds for Mason's stepchildren, medical bills when dad needed surgery, mom's catering business startup. I've given my professional expertise for free whenever asked. I've consistently shown up emotionally and financially while being treated as an afterthought. That dynamic ends today. The silence that followed held a different quality, less shocked, more calculating, as they assessed how this new version of me might impact their plans. My father, ever practical about financial matters, attempted redirection. Whatever issues we need to work through can happen over time. The contractor needs an answer by next week. His transparent prioritization of the renovation over relationship repair validated my decision. I've made my decision about the financing. I stated clearly. I won't be contributing to the renovation. The reaction was immediate. My mother's gasp, my father's darkening expression, Mason's sudden attention. You committed to this project, my father said, voice dangerously quiet. We've made arrangements based on your commitment. Just like I committed to attending a wedding on June 15th and made arrangements accordingly, I replied evenly. Commitments in this family appear to be flexible. The parallel landed precisely as intended. My mother switched tactics instantly, moving from wounded innocence to urgent concern. But what about your connection to your childhood home? Don't you want to preserve those memories? The irony of appealing to sentimental attachment after systematically undermining my place in the family was apparently lost on her. I've decided to direct my architectural expertise and financial resources elsewhere, I explained, describing my recent commitment to design a community center renovation in Boston. It's a project that aligns with my values and allows me to contribute to people who demonstrate reciprocal respect. Mason finally entered the conversation, anger breaking through his careful neutrality. So, you're punishing the entire family because your feelings got hurt? That's incredibly selfish, Savannah. His accusation, positioning my boundary as punishment rather than protection, might have devastated me months earlier. Now, it simply confirmed the accuracy of my decision. I'm not punishing anyone, I clarified. I'm allocating my resources according to how I'm valued. I would welcome a relationship with all of you based on mutual respect rather than utility, but that would require accountability for past behavior and changed patterns moving forward. I outlined specific conditions for continued relationship, acknowledgement of the wedding deception without deflection or minimization, recognition of long-standing patterns of exclusion, and commitment to transparent communication moving forward. My father's dismissive snort made his position clear before he even spoke. So, we have to submit to some kind of formal probation to remain in your life? This isn't how family works, Savannah. His rejection of basic relational standards as unreasonable perfectly illustrated why those standards were necessary. That's how healthy relationships work, I corrected gently. If those terms feel like probation rather than basic respect, that highlights exactly why I'm establishing boundaries. The conversation deteriorated predictably from there, my mother cycling through tears, guilt-inducing references to health concerns, and finally cold anger, my father moving from authoritarian demands to dismissive insults about my fancy Boston therapy theories, Mason escalating to accusations about family disloyalty that revealed more about his values than mine. Throughout their emotional display, I remained centered in a way that clearly unsettled them. They had expected either compliance or emotional breakdown, not composed boundary enforcement. When my father finally declared, "If you can't support this family financially after everything we've done for you, maybe you should reconsider whether you want to be part of this family at all," I recognized the ultimatum for what it was, a final attempt at control through the threat of rejection. My response came from a place of unexpected clarity. I've always wanted to be part of this family. The question is whether this family wants to include me as a person worthy of respect rather than as a financial resource. I gathered my belongings calmly, leaving the untouched renovation plans on the table alongside the boundary conditions I had printed. At the door, I turned back to see four stunned faces processing the realization that their familiar control tactics had failed. I'm staying at the West Side Hotel until Monday morning if anyone wants to discuss moving forward differently. I love you all and hope we can build something healthier. Walking to my rental car, I experienced neither triumph nor devastation, just the quiet certainty of having honored my worth after decades of allowing it to be diminished. 6 months after that pivotal Atlanta confrontation, my life had transformed in ways both subtle and profound. None of my family members had visited me at the hotel that weekend, though my mother had sent a text suggesting I was being dramatic and would come around eventually. Their confidence that I would revert to established patterns revealed how fundamentally they misunderstood the shift that had occurred. The early weeks of enforced boundaries had been challenging. The lifetime habit of seeking their approval didn't disappear overnight, and each ignored call or unanswered message triggered waves of programmed guilt. Dr. Winters helped navigate these reactions, normalizing the grief process while affirming the necessity of the boundaries I'd established. "You're mourning the family you deserve to have," she explained during a particularly difficult session, while creating space for relationships that honor your worth. Those relationships began developing in unexpected places. My colleague Diane, who had witnessed my breakdown after the wedding discovery, invited me to her family's monthly dinner gatherings. Initially attending out of politeness, I found myself embraced by her sprawling, noisy clan who demonstrated what family could be: supportive, respectful of differences, genuinely interested in each other's lives. My neighbor Malcolm, a retired English professor, became an unlikely friend after helping carry groceries during a Boston snowstorm. Our weekly coffee conversations about architecture, literature, and philosophy filled an intellectual connection I'd never experienced within my biological family. The community center renovation project I'd mentioned to my parents became a central focus, connecting me with local activists and residents who appreciated both my professional expertise and personal investment in their neighborhood. Working with people who expressed genuine gratitude rather than entitled expectation reminded me that contribution could be joyful rather than extractive. My professional life flourished amid these personal changes. Freed from the constant emotional drainage of dysfunctional family dynamics, I found renewed creative energy for my architectural work. My Boston firm recognized this shift, promoting me to senior design lead and featuring my community center project in their portfolio materials. The financial resources previously directed toward family emergencies accumulated steadily, allowing me to purchase a small but charming brownstone apartment I had previously only dreamed of affording. Occasional communications from my family arrived, testing whether my boundaries remained intact. My father sent renovation updates with passive-aggressive notes about how they had managed without burdening you. My mother's birthday card included guilt-inducing comments about families that stick together no matter what. Mason sent holiday photos of his stepchildren with pointed remarks about what you're missing by choosing to stay away. Each message revealed their unchanged perspective. My boundaries represented selfish abandonment rather than necessary self-protection. 3 months after the confrontation, an unexpected message arrived from Amber. Unlike my family's communications, hers acknowledged reality. I witnessed what happened at that lunch, and while I'm loyal to Mason, I can't pretend what they did with the wedding was okay. If you're ever ready to talk, I'd like to understand your perspective better. The olive branch, while tentative, represented the first recognition from anyone connected to my family that my experience had validity. Our subsequent coffee conversation during her Boston business trip opened a small channel of honest communication. Mason was raised to expect certain things, she admitted carefully. He doesn't always see how his family's dynamics affect others. While not exactly an apology, her acknowledgement represented progress. Through her, I occasionally received less filtered family updates. My parents had completed a scaled-down renovation. Mason had received a promotion. Family gatherings continued with my absence explained away through increasingly elaborate excuses. The knowledge brought a dull ache, but no longer the devastating pain of fresh exclusion. My most significant relationship development came unexpectedly through an architectural charity event where I met Ryan, an environmental engineer working on sustainable building solutions. Our professional collaboration evolved into friendship and eventually into a relationship built on mutual respect and transparent communication. When I finally shared my family history with him, his response was validating without being pitying. They missed out on knowing an extraordinary person. That's their loss, not a reflection of your worth. His healthy family relationships, complicated and imperfect but fundamentally loving, provided a model of what was possible when people valued connection above control. During our first holiday season together, his mother called specifically to check if I had dietary preferences for Christmas dinner, a small consideration that brought unexpected tears because it represented the attentiveness my own family had never shown. My therapeutic journey continued throughout this period of external change. With Dr. Winter's guidance, I explored how early family dynamics had shaped my self-perception, relationship patterns, and professional choices. I recognized how achievement had become both shield and currency in my attempt to earn unattainable approval. Most painfully, I confronted how I had internalized my family's narrative that my needs were excessive, my emotions inconvenient, and my boundaries unreasonable. Unlearning these beliefs proved more challenging than establishing external boundaries, requiring constant vigilance against the critical internal voice that spoke in my parents' tones. The wedding exclusion, while traumatic, had ultimately served as the catalyst for necessary change. Sometimes, Dr. Winters observed, we need a shock significant enough to disrupt our established patterns. Your family's actions around the wedding created irrefutable evidence that couldn't be rationalized away. 5 months after our confrontation, my mother reached out with a first communication that didn't include manipulation tactics. Her brief email acknowledged that things happened with the wedding that hurt you, not quite an admission of deliberate exclusion, but closer to reality than previous messages. She expressed interest in finding a way forward, though without specifics about what that might entail. After consultation with Dr. Winters, I responded thoughtfully, reiterating my conditions for healthy relationship while expressing willingness to start small if those conditions were respected. Our subsequent phone conversation contained moments of genuine connection amidst familiar defensive patterns, a mixture suggesting potential for change alongside deeply entrenched dynamics. My father and Mason remained distant, occasionally sending holiday messages or forwarding family photos, always carefully avoiding acknowledgement of the wedding situation or my subsequent boundaries. Their communications arrived like artifacts from a parallel reality where my exclusion had never occurred or had been definitively established as my fault. I responded politely but briefly, maintaining the boundaries that now protected my well-being. 6 months to the day after the Atlanta confrontation, I received an unexpected package from Aunt Patricia. It contained a flash drive of wedding photos she had collected from various family members, along with a note. I should have questioned why you weren't there. I'm sorry. The simple acknowledgement provided surprising healing, not because it changed what had happened, but because it confirmed my experience had been real rather than imagined or exaggerated. The photos showed events I would never witness firsthand, but viewing them from the emotional safety of my new life allowed me to process the exclusion without being re-traumatized by it. The experience crystallized an essential truth. Healing didn't require my family to acknowledge their behavior. It required me to acknowledge my worth regardless of their recognition. That understanding transformed my approach to these complicated relationships. I no longer needed them to validate my reality in order to trust it. I could engage with them on terms that protected my well-being while remaining open to whatever authentic connection might be possible within those boundaries. I could love them without needing them to be different, while simultaneously insisting on being treated with basic respect. 1 year after discovering the wedding deception, I find myself in a life reconstructed according to my own values rather than reaction to family patterns. The pain hasn't disappeared entirely. Grief for the loving family I never had emerges occasionally in unexpected moments. But alongside that grief exists profound gratitude for the authentic connections now filling my life, the professional work aligning with my values, and most importantly, the internal peace that comes from living truthfully. For those watching who recognize your own family dynamics in my story, please know that breaking generational patterns takes tremendous courage, but creates space for healing beyond what you might currently imagine possible. Setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's an act of self-respect that ultimately benefits everyone by modeling healthier relationship standards. Have you experienced family exclusion or had to establish difficult boundaries with loved ones? Share your story in the comments below. Remember that your worth isn't determined by how your family treats you, but by the authenticity and courage with which you honor yourself and others. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe for more conversations about family dynamics, healing, and personal growth. Thank you for witnessing my journey from exclusion to wholeness. May it illuminate possibilities on your own path toward authentic connection.